All right, we're going to go ahead and call the December 12th, 2022 Apex Planning Board meeting to order. Please bow your head for the invocation. Father God, we thank you for another day and the opportunity to serve the town of Apex. Give us, Board, the guidance necessary to hear the concerns from the town and make the best decisions for the town. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand and place the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Diane, do we have any items of information?
Yes, we have a couple. The first is that tomorrow night at the December 13th Town Council meeting, there will be a special presentation for the S-Line study update. This is a DOT project looking at passenger rail being extended in North Carolina from Sanford through Apex up to the North Carolina-Virginia line. And so if you'd like to hear the latest update, you can tune in. The meeting starts at 6 p.m. and it is live streamed if you would like to hear about that. And then the second item is I wanted to introduce our new planning tech, Lauren. She goes by Elle. Her first day was today. Just wave your hand over there. She's worked for over 35 years in residential and commercial real estate, and she's relocated back to North Carolina from Pennsylvania, and so we're really happy to have her on our staff, and we asked her just to step in until 5 o'clock, but we told her she could leave at that time. So I just wanted to introduce you to Lauren.
Welcome, Lauren. So Diane, to be clear, the town council meeting can be viewed on the public website, the town website?
It's
Or
the
YouTube?
it's the YouTube channel
Okay,
for the town of Apex.
all right, thank you. All right, so public comment. The purpose of public comment is to allow the public to speak on items that do not appear in this agenda under public hearings. Any member of the public wishing to comment on public hearing items will be called at the appropriate time later in this agenda. If you've not already done so, please sign in on my right, your left. This public comment period is an opportunity for the public to express concerns or opinions, but is not intended to be a question and answer session. During public comment, the public may comment on any non-public hearing item, including new business items that appear in this agenda. Comments from the public on new business items will not be taken later in the agenda, so if you wish to speak on a new business item, public comment is the time to do so. All comments must be limited to 3 minutes. When the 3 minutes is up, I will ask that you wrap up your comments. If there is a large number of speakers for one particular item, I'm going to ask that a representative be selected to speak for the entire group and limit the comments to 9 minutes. If not, comments on a single topic should not be repetitive in nature. If comments were already made by another speaker, please state agreement with the prior speaker and do not repeat what has already been stated. All right. So, item number 1 is going to be the minutes from the November 14th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review them? Any comments or possible motion?
I move to approve the minutes from the November 14th meeting.
Tina, a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, all right. Thank you, Daniel. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, passes unanimously. So we're going to move on to the public hearing section of the meeting. Shelley, here. Shelley's going to talk to us about a potential rezoning case 22 CZ20, the Preserve at Holt.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
The Reserve at Holt is shown kind of on the north central-ish edge of the town's jurisdiction. As you all might know, Holt Road intersects with Old Jenks in 2 places, and this is kind of along that westernmost or easternmost side of Holt. The project before you is just shy of 5 acres. It's 4.93. It's mostly wooded, as you can see, and there is a piece of stream that runs through it along the southern side and through here. As you can see, it's surrounded on 3 sides by the courtyards on Holt, and then on the other side is Holt Road with single-family homes, fairly large lots on the opposite side of the street. The applicant conducted I got ahead of myself. I apologize. The parcel is currently zoned rural residential. The applicant is proposing to rezone this to medium-density conditional zoning. That is consistent with the medium-density residential designation on the land use map. The parcel is currently in the town's ETJ, so does not need annexation at this point. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on September 14th, 2022. That meeting report is attached to your staff report. The Wake County Public Schools sent us a letter of impact for this school. That letter indicates that high schools within the current assignment area for this development are anticipated to have insufficient capacity for future students. However, school expansion or construction within the next 5 years may address those concerns. The applicant is proposing 6 uses for this project. They are single-family residential, botanical gardens, greenway, park active, park passive, and recreation facility private. Those are fairly standard when we're looking at a single-family residential development. The applicant's also proposing a variety of conditions. I will go through those for you. A good chunk of them, however, are architectural conditions that are pretty standard for this type of development, so I'm not going to read through each one of those for you. You're fairly familiar with them by now, and they are in your staff report as well. The applicant's limiting the number of lots to 4. The front setbacks will be changed to 20 feet. They're 25 feet for regular medium-density residential. And the project will extend the existing Elk River Drive right-of-way and connect to it. The UDO has a section within it that says that no single cul-de-sac may be longer than 600 feet in length. By extending this, the cul-de-sac would be 801 linear feet. That's because the existing road is already 725 feet. That's because this was a stub street and was not technically considered a cul-de-sac at the time that it was created. Perhaps a technical oversight, but it did not technically violate the UDO when it was built. In addition, the developer is proposing to dedicate the right-of-way required along Holt Road as based on the town's transportation plan final section for this width, and their half of that road and trail. The developer will also provide a 20-foot type B landscape buffer between this site and the courtyards on Holt, so that's 3 of the 4 sides, as well as public greenway easements to fulfill the requirements shown in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. The project will have 1 pet station within the community and install 1 sign to reduce pet waste in areas that are more publicly accessible. They're also proposing to preserve at least 50% of the existing tree canopy. This is over and above the UDO's typical requirement of 20% RCA on this site. In addition, they're proposing that at least 75% of the species used to meet the town's landscaping requirements will be native to the southeastern U.S. And all single-family homes will be pre-configured with solar or with conduit for a solar system, as well as providing at least a 4-kilowatt solar system on at least 2 homes within the development. So it's 2 homes out of a total of 4. All the solar installation required by this condition will be completed or under construction before 75% of the permits are issued. Warm season grasses will be used for drought tolerance as well. And front porches will be a minimum of 6 feet deep. In addition, the UDO actually has an exemption for subdivision plans that propose 4 lots or fewer within them. It and on page 3 of your staff report, I have excerpted that section of the UDO for you. It actually exempts them from having to build public road frontage improvements or even to dedicate any right-of-way that would be required by Advance Apex. It doesn't exempt them from the minimum requirements for safe ingress or egress, so things like making sure that the driveway aprons are appropriate and making certain that they're relocating the driveway if that's necessary, things of those nature. The applicant has proposed a condition that states that the 5-foot sidewalk will not be provided through the Holt Road thoroughfare. This condition is largely just to make it very clear and upfront to anyone moving into the development or in the surrounding area what the UDO already states. The rest of the condition also says that pedestrians will have sidewalk access to Holt Road through the courtyards on Holt subdivision and the future Greenway Trail. And this reduction is also intended to help keep impervious surfaces to a minimum. The development is intending to build less than 12% of the site with impervious surfaces. That's far below most of what we see in the town. To my knowledge, at least in the 9 years I've worked here, I've only had one other subdivision that's done this. It was on the other side of this road down Howell Road. And those lots were very, very large. These lots will be quite small. This is done partly to minimize the impacts on our surrounding watershed, but also because if they can keep it under 12%, they don't have to take up a portion of their buildable lot with stormwater controls, because that's an accepted exemption under the UDO. So although there's a condition stating that the sidewalk won't be provided, that's already something that's in the ordinance. I will say that town staff did discuss adding the sidewalk, and we did request that addition as well. We asked that they consider going ahead and building it, but considering the number of units and the fact that the UDO already has an exemption, when they said, I'm sorry, we can't afford it, we were willing to go with that since it doesn't violate the UDO. Staff recommends approval with the conditions as shown by the applicant. This did go to the Environmental Advisory Board on August 18th, and they did suggest several conditions, most of which were included in this. 3 of them were not. Those were a request to add a condition that existing trees greater than 12 inches in diameter that were removed during site development be replaced by planting a 1.5-inch native tree on site or at an alternative location approved by the town planning staff. Instead, the applicant added the 50% tree preservation condition, which is far more than what we typically see. The EAB also requested that they add a condition saying that tree clearing, SCM, or infrastructure, tree clearing regardless, or for installing the SCM or infrastructure, shall not occur or be placed within any zone of the riparian buffer, except as necessary for Town of Apex utilities and greenway construction. They did not include that as well. Again, they provided the 50% as an alternative, and also they don't plan to build an SCM, so that condition was largely superfluous in their minds. The third condition that was requested was that the development meet all stormwater reduction requirements in the UDO, and that they treat and meet the 25-year storm, which is over and above what this location would typically require. Again, since they want to stay under 12%, they would not need to add this condition. As I said, planning staff recommends approval. If you have any questions, the applicant is here to address them. If you have any questions about the sidewalk or transportation improvements, Russell is also here to answer those questions. I'm happy to answer anything I can for you now.
Any questions for Shelley? Did the applicant want to speak?
My name is Phil Cuck with Earth-Centric Engineering. We've been working with the developer on this particular project. One, we would like to thank staff because they have been very helpful in getting through the process. This is a relatively difficult site, and a couple of things that may not have come out clearly in just the way, because Shelley's got to present facts. I'm going to kind of bring out a couple of points that may not have been clear there. So there's an existing stream, as she showed, going through the site. One thing that wasn't noted in that is there's a large section of wetlands that also surrounds that stream. That wetlands buffer is not intended to be touched. The only area that might be impacted along the buffer is there's also a requirement for a sewer line to run through this site. We would be working with the town to place that sewer line. Additionally, there's a requirement for the greenway to go across this site. We've been working with the town on placement of where that would be. So in reality, one of the reasons why we looked at coming off of Elk River is, frankly, the entire buildable area is right beside Elk River. And more than half of this lot is really taken up in buffer, sewer areas across the stream from where the buildable areas are. So we really find ourselves limited to roughly 4 lots on the project just from that standpoint in order to make them usable at all. And then in order to actually cover the costs of development, we really would have to go for at least 4 units in order to make it functional, because that way we can provide the sewer, the easements, etc. So that was one of the reasons for kind of how we approached the project and what we felt was necessary in order to make the project viable. So one condition that has been asked about, and we believe we can add, but it's something that we didn't feel like we could just do without spending a little bit more time regarding staff, but I do want to bring up that we will work with them on that. There was a concern regarding bringing construction traffic through Elk River Drive and through the development. There is currently an existing drive off of Holt Road to the existing house. We would have to work with the DOT to get them to allow us to upgrade the permit for that, so that we could bring construction vehicles in and out. And then we would only have to access Elk River at the very end of the project for final lifts of paving, things along that line, or where we have utility tie-ins that require connection to Elk River's setup. Beyond that, we would intend to actually build the houses by entering off of Holt Street, assuming that we can get the temporary permit from the DOT. We would do 3 houses that way. The 4th house, I do not believe that would work, because that 4th lot would actually act as our staging area. That would be the only house that we would intend to actually access through Elk River in order to bring materials in, etc. So, but because that's kind of complicated, we felt like that's something that needs to be worked out with staff better in the wording of how that would be applied. So, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm sure that the neighbors will have some comments or questions that they want to address. Also, while I'm thinking about it, the SCM issue, we are staying under the 12%, partly because we are kind of forced into this really small area. You can't put an SCM into the buffer in a way that, it doesn't really work. And so that was one of the reasons we also chose to stick to this low impact development standard and have limited our impervious, and that will be a condition of approval at that time, is that the impervious would be limited on the lots to remain under the 12% impervious. So, all right, thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? I do have a question for you, Russell. In a lot of the exchanges, I saw there were questions about not being able to come into the neighborhood from Holt Road as it being a state road and no curb cuts and things. I'm very familiar with the curve there, and I know that house wasn't abandoned, but there was no traffic really coming in and out of there, and it's kind of a blind curve. So can you talk more to that?
I've not been provided any information for site distance study for that location where it would come out. The applicant has not proposed connecting to Holt Road. They have proposed the extension of the cul-de-sac and ending in a cul-de-sac, so that's what we've reviewed.
Okay.
And the applicant would have to answer any engineering questions concerning access to Holt Road. One thing I can say that if the road was curved and connected to Holt Road in some way, it obviously can't line up with Howell Road based on the environmental features. So at best, it would probably end up being a right-in, right-out if it was permitted by NCDOT based on the spacing from Howell Road.
I know there's a right-in, right-out as a second entrance for that neighborhood, so
Correct.
another curb cut that close kind of sounds odd.
Yeah, NCDOT did provide input that they would prefer not to have an additional access. They would prefer the longer cul-de-sac accessing the internal streets of the neighborhood, just because of their concerns about, additional access on a thoroughfare brings up additional safety concerns. Yeah, thanks.
Russell, I have a question for you. Since the cul-de-sac road is now going to be over 800 feet long, what are some of the potential concerns regarding that for, I guess, the township emergencies? Are there any limitations for the fire department or anything like that?
Not necessarily. I mean, they'd be the best to speak to that. We do have limitations on cul-de-sac length for a number of reasons. One is to promote connectivity. So just in our typical services that we provide, like trash pickup, it makes it a lot better when we have connecting streets. Same things for emergency response. So we like to avoid longer cul-de-sacs, but I can't speak to specifically if they were to respond out here, if it would be better to have, say, a right-in, right-out access on Holt versus a longer cul-de-sac in this kind of situation.
I can answer a technical question regarding that as well that may help.
Please.
The current item that you see in Elk River has a cul-de-sac. It's not actually a cul-de-sac. It's considered a temporary turnaround. So it doesn't actually meet the current configuration that the town would prefer for vehicles turning, particularly for fire department trucks coming in and out. The cul-de-sac that we would be proposing actually is a larger cul-de-sac and meets the city standards for a fire truck or for emergency vehicles making those kind of turns. So it actually becomes a safer situation for them. The issue, as Russell indicated with the DOT, not really wanting an additional access off of Holt Road, partly became that discussion about safety as well. They did not feel that it was a safe access point off of Holt Road in that area, and that the cul-de-sac would probably be preferred from a safety standpoint, since we were only proposing 4 units.
I just have one more point to make that I forgot to add during my presentation, and I apologize. So what we're actually faced with here are two standards of the UDO that this particular subdivision would be in violation of one or the other. There's the UDO requires a minimum of 500 feet of spacing for connections along thoroughfares, which is what Holt Road is, and the distance between Howell Road here and the closest place that they could put a road is about 355, 385 feet or so. So it's not sufficient to meet the town's standard for that reason. When this first came in for a pre-application meeting, Russell and I actually had a couple conversations. It's been a while. I had to reread my emails today, so that's the only reason I can remember this right now, where we talked about whether or not having a slightly longer cul-de-sac would be safer than having an additional connection to Holt Road, when we know that from other subdivisions in the area, not necessarily this one explicitly, that Holt Road has some site distance challenges. We don't have any information right now on this particular location site distance issues, but it's not easy to get out there sometimes. I drove the road the other day just to make sure that I was remembering that correctly from when Middleton was built. And so when we talked about it, we kind of went back and forth, and we talked about the possibility of having both, but the developer is exempt from doing frontage improvements, which would have, which includes connections to the road possibly, except for driveways. And we went back and forth on this and decided that adding an additional 100 feet to the projects, to the maximum cul-de-sac length seemed like it was likely to be safer, especially for a developer who cannot afford to make the road improvements that would be necessary to fix some of those site distance issues. So I just happened to have this in my notes, but I forgot to read it to you all earlier, and I just wanted to make sure you had that information. So we're looking at potential, a zoning condition has to be used in order to fix the problem, because a zoning condition is the only thing that trumps the UDO, other than going to the Board of Adjustment and asking for a variance. So since they had to have a rezoning in order to get the other items on their list, we figured that this was the best time to also request a zoning condition to adjust that use standard.
So Shelley, if, and Russell, just because of something you said earlier, because we're in this juxtaposition of one UDO against another,
Mhm.
what, I'm questioning what are the safety concerns from fire and police standpoint? And I feel like you said we would have to ask them, but I am curious if we're, you know, if we're having to look at being in violation, right? The UDO is in, exists for the reason, and safety is part of it. And I understand here, I feel like we're choosing between the lesser of evils, but my concern is, are we actually creating the hazard?
To the best of my knowledge, I don't think so, but I'll be frank, I did not call fire or EMS today before this meeting. I will make certain to do that before town council and to include any comments from them in my staff report, so that will be publicly available.
So, Ms.
Thank you.
Sherman, I just want to interject here. The police and fire are on the technical review committee, and they review all these projects, and they did not indicate in their comments that they had a concern.
That is true.
Okay, and actually, that was, I figured if they went before the Board of Adjustments, then that would have gone before fire, but they went to TRC and that did not. If we could just double check.
Fire is a part of the technical review committee, and they do review every zoning case and are assigned to every one of them. And they have in the past asked for additional conditions to handle access and turnarounds and things of that nature. They did not at this time, but I will make sure before the town council meeting to double check that with them. I'm happy to do that.
That would be helpful. I have a concern that we are, you know, for connectivity purposes, we don't like to add cul-de-sacs. And so I'm concerned that we're adding a cul-de-sac and we're sort of, you know, again, this juxtaposition between the two. And so I think hearing from, hearing explicitly from fire and police would be helpful.
Certainly. You're welcome.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
The current turnaround now, is that going to be replaced? Or is it just going to be straight through and you're going to extend those front lots? Or is it going to remain and then go 100 feet and then have a full?
Typically, it'll be that second one.
Okay.
The developer could do that, but and if this was a larger developer, possibly they would with a bigger project. But it's unusual to do that, just because that means coming in and basically tearing up people's front yards as is. And while they might appreciate getting some of their grass back, they're not going to be happy when it's being torn up in the first place. So generally speaking, the turnaround will stay and it'll connect through to the cul-de-sac. I think that's what we've seen in most cases.
Okay.
It will be a
And then,
larger cul-de-sac, of course, and have a fuller turnaround to it.
Okay. And then next question is probably more or less for the applicant, but as far as these 4 units being tied into any type of HOA that's currently there, as far as what can and cannot be, you know, whatever type of HOA they have set up, bylaws that they have, is this going to be similar? Is this going to be?
That would be for the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
They would develop their own HOA that would be separate, so, you know, they still have to deal with the stormwater and common areas that are there. So even though it's an LID, you still have, you know, maintenance of making sure that the storm drain lines, et cetera, are held up. So, I mean, they would still have whatever they develop as their own HOA to handle those 4 units.
Okay, because I can see there could be a potential issue where if these 4 units do not take on the identity of the current HOA, where they can now, you know, keep boats or other things out where other, you know, neighbors next door just could not.
Well, and again, you know, this roadway would be an extension of a public roadway. There actually would be sidewalk going around, so I mean, the neighborhood, you know, just like they would be able to pass on a public roadway, the neighbors beside them would be able to walk through their public roadway in order to access, say, the greenway that's gonna eventually be going through this property. So that would all be, you know, those are public greenways, it's public right-of-ways, those things would be accessed by either group,
Okay,
so.
I'm sorry, could you clarify, I understand that the access, but I'm not clear on how the.
So the
I'm
HOA,
sorry, let me finish.
sure.
Okay, I'm not clear, so I understand what an HOA does, but if these 4 units do not adopt a similar policy, there is a potential for conflict, if not, you know, there's a potential for conflicting, HOA, policies, if not even, you know, just the 4 units could decide not to have an HOA, and that could be potentially problematic in this very enclosed space. So I hear the access to sidewalks and it's a public street. I completely understand that. I'm concerned about the 4 individual neighbors with our other neighbors in the neighborhood, and how not having the same HOA, if not similar HOA policies, could cause a potential problem.
Well, again, I think on one end, you would have that situation in any development where you approve a development over here, they're not required to have the same HOA restrictions as the neighboring group. So I mean, that's a problem in policy to begin with, if that's your concern. What I can speak to is where there is public access, that has to be honored by all groups, right? So you have a public street, both parties, all parties essentially, even people outside of the development have access to a public street. Same thing with the greenway. So both developments are actually going to have people passing in and out of a development that may not live in that development. In regards to maintenance of houses and stuff, this HOA, because the houses are going to be likely slightly different from the houses next door, they would have to have an HOA that would address their concerns regarding houses and the maintenance and upkeep of that, as well as the maintenance and upkeep of any shared items. So.
I appreciate your answer. I do want to say there's a conflict there, and I hope that you can circle back and address that, but I know one of my fellow board members had a question as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
So with there being 4 houses as part of this, and I know the Postal Service is kind of going toward consolidated mail, will these 4 houses have their own consolidated mail, or will the residents
do
here
have their
have to
own
travel?
Yes, they would have their own consolidated mail.
Okay.
In fact, that is a condition, I believe, if you read through the conditions. Typically for a mail kiosk or a CBU, you would have a parking space, but since there's only 4 houses here, all of them would have access from the sidewalk, and the mail CBU is actually placed behind the sidewalk, which is one of the things that does have to be covered by the HOA. So,
Thank you.
this is the maintenance of that.
Mr. Phil, I have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
One being, there was, I guess, it was clear to me. Can you please confirm the construction entrance of the site? And then my second question is, what was the final decision on the sidewalk connection on Halt? Because the current courtyards is like, it's like here, and then the site is in the middle, and you have that gap of a sidewalk. What was,
So the current roadway, Elk River Road, comes down, there's sidewalk on each side, okay? We would be completing that around the cul-de-sac. There is an entrance that goes out to Holt Road just slightly above our site. So rather than putting yet another connection out to Holt Road directly from the cul-de-sac and then having another connection out to Holt Road because of the Greenway extension, which would be 3 connections in a very short order, the exemption that was asked for was to not put that additional sidewalk connection in, which ends up adding about 700 square feet of impervious area, and instead let us tie to the Greenway area so that you can actually walk the sidewalk in our area, tie into the Greenway and out to Holt Road, or go upward on Elk River to the next entrance onto Holt Road.
I guess my concern was more on Halt Road. There's a big gap between the
That's correct, and that's part of what Shelley was speaking about regarding
frontage.
the frontage improvements. So,
Okay. And then the construction entrance.
the construction entrance, what we intend to do, and again, we have to get approval from NCDOT for this, would be to upgrade the existing driveway for the existing house that's there. That house will be removed, but take that driveway that's already a permitted drive cut, turn that into a temporary construction entrance, and then all the construction vehicles would access the site through that. Because the fact that that's already a permitted entrance, it's probably what the DOT also has figured is probably about the best access onto the site, given the restrictions on either side. So,
Thank you.
yes.
2 questions. I was looking at your exhibit that's pulled up on the screen right now. It shows a perennial stream that flows. Based on the way it appears, is the site flowing southeasterly or
No, it actually flows northwesterly, I believe.
so is it going from a perennial feature into an intermittent?
It actually gets, there's a detention system just north of this project. That's part of the courtyards. So we're following where the water passes underneath Holt Road, and then that stream system with wetlands and some backups there encompass that whole area. So that's why it gets bigger there, is because that wetlands expands out around that kind of backflow area. So that's part of the issue there.
2 other small questions.
Sure.
So you're not making you're dedicating a greenway easement, but the actual greenway itself is a fee in lieu because it's only 4 units and it doesn't really make sense, I guess.
Right, and that's, the expense of building that is actually handled within kind of the payment in lieu that's given to the town to build that section as they go through.
If that were built with this project, would it kick you over the 12%, do you believe?
No, we actually had to turn around and incorporate that impervious. So again, that's another limitation on the entire building area of the site. And we have worked out a route with the Parks and Rec Department on that.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry, I'm gonna follow up, just one more time on the HOA, and this will show my ignorance on HOAs. Is it possible to, have if this community decides to have an HOA, to have the HOA be, duplicative of the current HOA? Is that possible as a condition?
I mean, I can't state that. That would be something that the developer would have to speak with the neighboring development and come to an agreement whether that was correct for this development. But given the size of this development and that this is not an active 55 development, I suspect that would not be the same.
Diane?
There's also a very limited amount of common area and common utility that needs to be shared. Like I said, the mailbox, that's a required element that would have to be, there has to be something regarding upkeep of that. Okay, those kind of things would still need to be in some form of HOA or maintenance agreement for the development.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, now we'll open up the public comment section for 22 CZ 20.
Just to let you know, sir, these are the residents who sent emails into town staff and to the planning board. Do you have a copy of the sign-in sheet?
No. Wow. A lot of attendees. All right. And I'm not on that list there. Sent emails already. Oops. All right. Chuck Matina.
Shelley, can you go back to the map of kind of the overhead map, if you don't mind?
Sure. Which map would you like?
It was kind of the very first, perfect, that one. So,
Shelley, one second, Mr. Matina. Shelley, quick question. Since we've already gotten emails from some of the folks who are checked in, do we have to hear from them again?
Only if they ask to speak,
Okay.
in which case, we would disregard the emails generally.
All right, thank you. Mr. Matina.
first of all, I want to do a little bit of theater. We can all raise our hands from Courtyards and Holt. So you can kind of see that we're very passionate about this rezoning case. So, and thank you guys for your questions. Just a couple things. As a four-home development, they are not required to have an HOA. So we're not sure that, you know, them ever having an HOA will be something that'll be there. So not surprisingly, we're gonna ask you guys to not approve the zoning request at this particular time, because there are some things that we would like in that conditional zoning that aren't in there now. And from what we understand, the only conditions that the town of Apex can enforce are those conditions that are made part of the conditional zoning of the property by agreement between the developer and the town. So right now, we have no written agreements with the developer at all about some of these conditions. The first one is that we do think that the EAB's suggested condition about the trees, that any trees greater than 12 inches in diameter be replaced by planting a 1.5 inch caliper tree be included in the proposed zoning request. We feel like that's the only way that you can hold the developer accountable for replacing mature trees that are taken down. I know we talked a lot about 50% canopies and everything else, but really what we're talking about is a very small piece of property that a lot of trees can be taken down in that piece of the property and not particularly replaced. The second thing is, and I think Shelley, you talked about it, is the 20-foot buffer that is in the conditions right now. During our homeowners meeting, when we asked them about that 20-foot buffer, their response was, it's a 10-foot buffer that is required and provided, plus a 10-foot buffer that's already on the Courtyards of Holt, which would equal a 20-foot combined vegetative buffer of 20 feet. That was question and concern number 28 in the packet. What we'd like to do is, since they have stated that they're going to put a 20-foot vegetative buffer in there, a type B buffer, we would like that buffer to start at the Courtyard of Holt's property line and extend 20 feet. We don't feel like they should get the credit for the 10 feet that's already in the Courtyards of Holt, and we'd like that condition put into the zoning request. The third is from our neighborhood meeting. The developer said that they're not showing any accessory dwelling units and they do not want them. We would ask that that also be put into the conditional or into the conditions of the zoning request, so we have that in writing. There's also a privacy fence right now. I don't know how to necessarily point it out, but where our cul-de-sac ends right now, there is a privacy fence that has been built. And we would like to ask that that fence be maintained and that any damage to the fence would be responsibility of the developer. And again, that be included into the conditions of the zoning. If some of their equipment ever damaged that privacy fence, we want to feel like we have a right to go back and make sure that that is repaired. The last thing that we'd like to have in the rezoning request is that in their response to the Wade County residential developer notification, they indicated that 3 homes would be completed in 2023, and that the final home would not be completed until June of 2024. We feel like that, basically they're asking to extend the development of that property by at least 18 months, which means construction traffic and everything else coming in and out of Elk River Drive and whatever for 18 months. We feel that's an excessive period of time to build 4 homes. So we would ask that the council put something into the condition that gives them a time frame to say, they can't build ad infinitum into that development. And by the way, I think I'm going to take the 9 minutes because I see my time is going up. So I think I'm going to be
You're
able.
speaking for everybody
Yes.
else, is that right?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
so we're gonna reset the timer then, is that accurate, Jerry?
Sorry about that. I should have said that up front. The second thing is we want to talk a little bit about the entrance to the property. I know a lot has been talked about the entrance to the property, and it's kind of been interesting because everything's been about logistics and turnarounds and this feed and that feed and everything else. I think some of the questions got to the heart of our concerns, which is there's also people involved, people's and homes involved in this as well. We feel like an entrance off of Holt Road would give the preserve what they want, which is an individual community with their own street name and everything else. So that would give them their own identity as far as a community. The other thing is we've not seen a traffic impact analysis. And one of the concerns that we have is right now, and you can't see it on this map, but if you exit off of, when you come into our development on Phillips Branch Street, it dead ends, and then we connect to Middleton in their neighborhood by Gilwood. Right now, through the entire construction, we have that has been barricaded. We wholeheartedly believe once that barricade comes down, people on Gilwood and Kirkwood will use Phillips Branch Street as a cut through to get to Davis Drive and when they want to go to Wegmans. So what we really feel is what's going to happen is now we'll have more traffic coming from Middleton, we'll have more traffic coming from the Preserve, and ultimately what we're going to do is kind of create a choke point on Phillips Branch Street. To some extent, it might even be safer for an entrance for the Preserve on Holt rather than coming through Phillips Branch Street. So it's really not necessarily that there's more traffic coming on Elk River, it's Elk River plus Phillips Branch Street which is part of that problem. The second thing is kind of what you guys have been alluding to a little bit, which is just the cohesiveness of the neighborhoods. I think you can see right now, if you cut through the cul-de-sac right now, essentially you're adding 4 homes that can look different and feel different than the 89 homes they're connected to. I don't think anybody can look at this and say putting 4 homes at the end of a cul-de-sac of a dead-end street where there's 21 homes leading up to it isn't going to feel like an afterthought. And that's a huge concern to us. So we are planned development, and 89 residents decided to build in that development because we like the consistency and cohesiveness that came with that development. And we all signed on to the HOA. I mean, heaven knows we complain about it on the streets, but we all built it. We all signed on to our HOA because we want to maintain that cohesiveness in our neighborhood. So our concern is that putting again 4 homes at the end of our development will feel like we've added 4 random homes to a planned community of 89 homes. And one of the things that we looked at is section 9.3.1 of the UDO talks to the architectural character, and that focuses obviously on the micro level details that greatly affect the overall appearance of a particular development. One of the things that section says is that the town actively discourages proposals that have not taken these matters into account. The town desires that all developments be treated as lasting contributors to the community and as good neighbors to the surroundings. One of the concerns we have is we've not seen any elevations of what these homes are even gonna look like. We have a community of 89 homes that roughly share 5 different models, so we all look alike, feel alike, and that is by design, and that's one of the things we desired. We have no idea what these developments are, what these homes are gonna look like. Secondly, that you guys talked about not sharing the HOA. We all exist under the same covenants and restrictions. Those homes will not share those same covenants or restrictions. I think somebody talked about a boat or an RV in the parking lot, in their garage, in their driveway. We can't do that. That's certainly something that we can't control, literally a door down from our neighbors. So we have a lot of concern that, again, not sharing the HOA is gonna create the conflict, I think, Ms. Sherman, that you talked about. So not that we want to go into this thinking there'll be conflict, but there certainly is a potential for conflict by not having the same HOA. So that's another concern we have. And then respectfully, we're also concerned by the fact that this is the first development for SRP signature homes. The town of Apex and the homeowners of the courtyards cannot gauge the quality of construction that's going to go up there because there are no existing developments that we can look at and say that is an SRP signature home development. SRP Signature Homes does not have a known track record for delivering on the promises they're making to the town or to the courtyards and Holtz. And we've heard a lot of promises. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, but you know, they're just promises, and they have no track record. While we have no known reason to doubt SRP Signature Homes, we don't have anything to go by since this is their very first development. So extending Elk River Drive will forever physically connect 4 homes that have no obligation to look like or act like the other 89 homes they're connecting to and are being built by a developer with no previous track record. So I hope you guys can understand how much that concerns all of the residents of the courtyards on Holt. And just for the record, we have no desire to be a landlocked development. Again, we do connect to Middleton, which is a rather large development that we connect to. So the difference is when you leave courtyards and go into Middleton, you know you're going into different development and vice versa. There's no way that you can step off the last house in the courtyards of Holt and go into the cul-de-sac and say you're in a different development. It's 4 homes at the end of our street. So to summarize, we understand that this property will eventually be developed. We understand that. However, during our homeowners meeting with the developer, they stated that they would like to start next summer, but they don't really know. So they're not in a rush. We would just simply ask that you not be in a rush to approve this rezoning at this particular time. We just like more time to ensure that our concerns are addressed in terms of the conditions. We're asking more time to fully understand the architectural character of the community, particularly that this is because this is a first-time developer. And we're asking you to give us more time to understanding the decision-making process around the entrance, because that is a game changer for the people at the courtyards on Holt.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Shelley, I guess I have a couple of questions I want to try to reiterate around the entrance. Since Courtyards on Holt has 2 entrances, both on Holt. One's a right in, one right out, and the other's a full access. This small parcel, we're saying, is not going to have entrance on or off of Holt Road other than the construction through the driveway. They're going to connect through that one road, which snakes through that neighborhood to get out to Holt, or can come out through the second entrance, or even go into Middleton and get out. So I guess I need to understand why we think that there should be another entrance there.
That's an excellent question. The reason why Catlett Street is a right in, right out is because it was considered to be too close to Howell Road,
Right.
but offset. And because the developers for the courtyards were not able to come to terms with the previous owner of this parcel, they couldn't get a road through. As you can see, if this had continued all the way through,
Supposed to go straight through.
we might have been able to get a straight through. this connection up here, so this is where the house was.
Right.
It's been demoed.
Yep.
So this is roughly where that driveway is. That's only slightly longer than down here, but we already have, we have an option at this point to provide a connection through existing roads instead of having an entirely new subdivision that only has the option to connect to what's already a fairly busy road with sight distance difficulties. When we were discussing this, we kind of went back and forth on it, but because there's actually the other, I wish I could show it. Entrance to Middleton is actually pretty close to Catlett
Yes, it
Street
is.
as well.
Yeah, so at the top.
So we would have three very close connections only on the west side.
Right.
If we counted Howell Road in, that would be four, spaced roughly 300 feet apart from each other. And that's just a lot of traffic on a fairly busy road. And although Phillips Branch might possibly get more cut-through traffic, I'm uncertain that it normally would. They might see some increase to it, but I wouldn't expect a sizable amount. And the entrance to, if we're looking at the top of my screen, the entrance
The
is like
turn lanes
right
up
here.
there.
Right. So it just seems like a much safer road and a road connection. For one thing, the speed limits
40.
through the neighborhood are much slower. They're 25 as opposed to the 45 on Holt Road. So if there is an accident within the neighborhood, it is at least theoretically supposed to be a much slower impact.
Right.
Whereas if somebody has another accident coming out onto Holt Road through that connection, there's a good chance that even if they're just turning left or right out of this, it's gonna be a much higher speed.
Shelley, and I apologize to build off what Reggie said. I think I misunderstood.
Yes, sir.
It is not that there can't be a road that's built, which I think is what I heard. It is not that there can't be. It is that we are saying that there are other options. So do I understand that correctly? It is not that there can't be a road.
That's correct. As long as now this hasn't gone for review to DOT, but I was copied on some emails between Russell and DOT. And their preference would be for it to stay without a connection because in general, their preference is to try to limit connections onto state-owned roads, particularly the bigger, higher traffic state-owned roads. But they did say that once they got the subdivision for review, it's possible they might be willing to approve a right-in, right-out there.
But can you dig into that a little bit more? What does that take to get that review? And
They have to submit a subdivision plan, and at this point, they won't be able to submit a subdivision plan without a rezoning. And with preliminary review from staff, our determination, and again, preliminary, we don't have all of the data we would get otherwise, is that it is safer to extend Elk River Drive for an extra 100 feet or so than it is to add another connection onto Holt Road.
Living in that area, I would agree with that.
Yeah,
It's a bit unusual.
it is.
But developments do
it is-
attach regularly to one another, as
Yes.
in this case.
It is
But
certainly.
it does look like remind me, the cul-de-sac that is proposed is going to be larger than the existing turnaround stub out scenario. So the existing road was built with a stub out with the foresight that eventually something will be built. But this is gonna be a larger cul-de-sac for better fire truck turnaround, safety vehicle.
I was actually involved in all of the developments along this road within, at least on this side of this road since I've started. And originally Middleton came in with the Catlett property and with this property. And then they dropped off some properties because they were told it was too big and too much, too fast. So then the Courtyards came in, and they were not able to come to terms to purchase this property from the owner. He wanted more than they were able to provide. And during that time, we had conversations about how this parcel would connect. The town's UDO requires that we provide connections to parcels that will either be difficult to develop or potentially unsafe or have no other access. And this one was deemed that we would prefer to have another connection here as opposed to making them rely on their own for just their frontage. To your earlier question about a TIA, Ms. Sherman, my understanding is this doesn't meet the thresholds for a TIA. It certainly doesn't meet the thresholds for one at this stage of development. Even if this were a planned unit development, though, the 4 units wouldn't be sufficient to require that. And this will probably be a very low traffic generator. I mean, Russell's the experienced one, but I do listen to him when he talks most of the time, so.
I think that's one of the questions I have. I definitely understand that this is not an ideal situation, but if we're talking about 4 homes and an exit right there, and the town is committed to connectivity, that feels like a potential in which, and I hear that there was discussion, so I'd be curious as to kind of how we landed there when we're talking about 4 homes, potential additional connection.
So we also talked with the applicant about potentially bringing the road through and connecting to Holt. That was going to take up about the same width as a lot, because that's a 50-foot right-of-way, I think, for a local connector. And that's about the width of one of their lots. So that would have been requiring even more pavement and everything with less return back to them. So part of what town staff and planning has to kind of judge is not just what's in the UDO and what's normal, but also the relative impacts or things that we can require from a development versus what's proposed to be done. There's actually a U.S. Constitution or U.S. Supreme Court cases talking about exactly that. And the exemption that this falls under for the 4 units and the road improvements was added to the UDO in an attempt to quantify that, so that we weren't violating Supreme Court rulings, and we weren't requiring things from a development that don't have a rational nexus and rough proportionality. I need sticky notes. So that way we don't have a problem where we could potentially either be causing more of an issue to a developer or getting the town in trouble. So this one's tricky. We do have 2 standards that we could have looked at and said, well, maybe it's safer to do the other way, but it doesn't seem like that's the case to us, and it seems like 4 additional units isn't gonna cause that much additional traffic to the neighbors.
Right.
And they will be their roads will open up to Middleton at some point. But generally speaking, most of the courtyards is fairly circuitous. There's not a straight shot from Middleton up to the north part of Holt, and that was by design.
Right.
It was trying to keep people from shooting through there and using it as a big bypass. Yeah. And this would go along with that to try to keep people on Holt for the most part. There's a thing under there that is easy to kick.
I have a question and maybe just clarification. I thought the connectivity was required in the UDO. I mean, that's normally what happens with these. Is that not the case here?
It's not required to connect to Holt. Connectivity is required.
Yes, that's what was my question, to connect to the stub.
Yes,
So that-
connecting to the stub is required regardless. So the option is not really that they can have a connection to Holt or the connection to the stub. The option is actually, and thank you, I should have clarified this earlier. The option is actually that they can connect to the stub and that's it with a cul-de-sac, or they can connect to the stub and come over here. And not only was this deemed to potentially create more cut-through traffic, but also take up the entire width of a lot when they only have 4 that they can build. And so this seemed to both help the developer out as far as not taking away 25% of their developable area. One lot would not be particularly difficult if this were, say, 50 or 100 lots, because that proportion is much lower of their bottom line. But
You still run into the issue of having too many access points on Holt Road,
Right.
regardless of how many lots are there.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like it's already developed out. It's already,
there's already a lot of connection
Right.
there.
Yes.
So we're
that's
clear
another
on-
big issue there.
So the clear is that the required connect to the stub, right? I mean, as in
Yes, sir.
every other subdivision we have.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's what I was curious about the conversation. I was thinking we were doing either or, and I was confused.
I probably didn't make that clear, so I will take that as feedback for the next presentation.
Any other questions for Shelley? All right, and I will bring it back to the board for discussion.
Excuse me, sir, you didn't
Yes.
close the public hearing.
I need to close the public hearing. Thank you.
Get clarification on that buffer issue.
Oh, thank you. The resident who came up and spoke mentioned that originally the developer had only proposed to provide 10 feet of buffer on their side and that the 10 feet on the courtyard's property would then amount to 20. That is not what this condition means. This condition means the courtyards will still have their 10 feet and this developer is providing 20 feet. So you will actually see 30 feet of space from property line to property line, pin to pin. So,
So 30-foot total.
yes, sir.
Okay.
But the condition will be 20, they will provide 20 feet on their
Their own
side of the
20,
property.
right.
Yes, sir. And then the applicant did tell me that while they were listening, that there is a privacy fence that is on the courtyard's property, and that they will do everything in their power to stay out of that. The 20 feet of buffer actually helps that a lot, but it currently goes across the right-of-way. So the portion that's across the right-of-way will have to come down. And they plan to just cut that in a way that will not be unattractive, instead of, thinking that we've got the Looney Tunes. That's the visual that happened in my head.
So that fence, once it comes down, that opens them up to the street,
It does.
and it would not go back.
It would not go back. Now, if they add the construction entrance condition, and I will be working with them on that, we had some questions about when exactly the timing for that would need to be worked out. But if they add that condition, then they can put barriers, like those water barriers that you see in places up that say no access. And we can even add that there'll be a sign at the entrance up here that will say no entrance for construction traffic to Preserve at Holt, which is fairly consistent with what we've done in other subdivisions
Yes.
over the years.
I put my name on the list. Can I have 2 or 3 minutes?
All right, so
It's a
we,
different topic.
the one guy spoke for everyone, did he not?
Where's a different topic that was not included?
Okay, and your name, sir?
Armando Gar, the second on the list.
Mr. Gar. All right, you sent emails.
Yes, but I have a different topic on the same development. Just before my topic, just wanted to remind everyone, in front of this, on Holt Road, in front of this land and in front of the courtyards, we're talking about one access point, maybe having a second one, and that may be an issue. Before this development, there were 5 driveways going into Holt Road. So now we're talking adding, Phillips Ranch is the only one right now, we're talking adding a second one, so that's not unreasonable to have a second one, because we used to have 5 before. Anyway, my point that I wanted to make was regarding the Greenway. The proposal mentions that there's going to be, and I quote, the design provides pedestrian sidewalk access to the public system. And if you looking at the site plan, it shows a greenway from Holt Road to the courtyards, and also a street connect, a trail connector from the greenway to the end of the cul-de-sac. Well, actually, the developer will not build the greenway, will not build the connector trail, and even the sidewalk on Holt. Instead, because it's a small development, they're going to pay a fee. They told me around $15,000 for a trail for a greenway that I was told by the town is going to be costing more than $110,000. So that's fine. Further, so we're talking of this greenway that's not going to be built, and it's not part of the town of Apex, what they call it, the 5-year capital improvement plan. So there's a greenway that's actually not going to be built, and by the developer or by the town for many years. The Unified Development Ordinance states that only the payment of fees shall be required due to the size of the development unless the the development abuts an existing plant park or greenway. Now, this proposed greenway would connect to the North Beaver Creek Greenway that's in the courtyards. So I am questioning if this exemption really applies in this case. So my request is for you to consider if this development should be exempt from this building this greenway at this time. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So Shelley, to that point, the greenways that are going through Middleton that are planned, that'll eventually get up to Salem Middle School in that area, I didn't think were cutting through that area at all. Is that different?
So yes, there is,
There's an access point
There are
that would
2
be at the back
points.
of that neighborhood,
yes.
of the proposed neighborhood.
So there is a development, there is a greenway that will come down here and connect through
Right,
to Salem
through
eventually.
Middleton.
That is slightly different than this because that's on the opposite side of the road. This greenway, if you see this sidewalk here, or this, and this piece here, this will actually come together here and provide access to those greenways through the sidewalk connection. And I think, I don't have a screenshot of the greenway plan, but they will connect through there. And then the applicant intends to provide a connection through here. So as close to Elk River Drive as possible to get people access to the rest of this. And it will come down through this way and over. So there are 2 things here. One of them is that the UDO already specifically states that developments under a certain size will provide fee in lieu, period. And so that is not an exemption, that's something that the planning board can waive. What you can request is construction instead of, so you can make the request, but the applicant has to agree to the condition. My understanding is the applicant is not prepared to agree to that, but I will let them answer that. It's a standard process across.
Shelley, it's actually the town council that makes the decision on.
Thank you, that's what I meant to say. I said the wrong board, I apologize. So they can ask for that condition to be added, but it's an exemption that's already in the ordinance, it's already codified, and it's consistent across all developments this size, regardless. And actually, if this developer if this rezoning is declined, and the developer decides to build, for example, a single-family house on the property, which he's allowed to do by right at this point, then he would not be required to provide any of the easements or any of the sewer connection or any of the sidewalk or anything else that are already being offered with this development. So all of the things that are already outlined, including the additional environmental advisory board conditions and things of that nature, would not be on the table anymore. So while I understand that the residents would like to see that greenway built as soon as possible, we are at least getting the easements, which are frequently the most difficult portion to get for the town. I did just recall a comment that the earlier speaker had made about Section 9 and the architectural compatibility standards. The same architectural conditions that are listed on this rezoning are part of the courtyards at Holt to a very large extent. I would have to look at the 2 to be certain that they're identical, but they are our standard architectural conditions, and they generally do not vary by much. So they will, even though there's no architectural renderings being provided with this particular type of rezoning, they will largely still have to meet the same conditions that the courtyards had to.
All right, with that, I'm going to close the public comment section.
There's no one else.
No. Bring it back to the board for discussion and a possible motion.
I'll go first on this one. I'm really torn on this one because it's only 4 units. It's less than 1 acre a lot because it's 4.9 acres for 4 units, which is uber low density. As an industry in an area, we're fighting to get, you know, enough housing stock for all the jobs that are coming in this area. So I really wrestle with going that low, but looking at what they've got, they don't really have a whole lot of options, I don't think. But because it's so low, we're losing out on our frontage improvements. They don't have to give right away. I think they are dedicating right away though. We have no stormwater control measures, so this watershed kind of, I did the project down there called Oak Point, right above Highway 64 and 55. It adjoins your neighborhood, I think, and that stream is pretty rough. So I wish we had stormwater, but it, you know, they're 12% impervious, so I get it. But I just wish this could be more dense to justify the sidewalk along the frontage, because I think that's the biggest problem I have with it, is that there's no interconnectivity for pedestrians. But that's why I'm torn, because it's only 4 units, and what else are you gonna do?
Right.
So I'd like to hear the other board members' perspectives.
I agree. I'm looking at just the street view of it. It does seem to be a pretty big topo drop off at that low-lying point along the stream. So
Yep.
I can see how you'd be disturbing a lot of wet area in order to level that out for a sidewalk. So I'm with you. I'm torn, but this does seem like the best solution for minimal impact.
I remember when the courtyards were being built and there was talks of having 4 phases and taking over the neighboring homes back up to Montclair's neighborhood. And unless that happens, I don't see how you get sidewalks along Holt ever, to be quite honest. For this short section, you're talking 100 yards worth of sidewalk with a lot of drop off along Holt Road. No one's walking along that section of road. I don't see a sidewalk being used there, to be quite honest.
I feel like this is, I'm with you, I'm torn. I've voiced some of my concerns. I think I mainly feel like this is almost close to perfect, but not quite there. You know, between the HOA concerns, I'm with you, there's probably not gonna be a sidewalk there. I still like the sidewalk. I do feel like there's this sort of question, I know I think I'm probably in the minority here. I feel like there's this question about the connectivity, and just the fact that we had these two UDO points against each other. So I feel like we're again, I think to Chuck's point, good project, but not quite there. I'm concerned that some of the concerns aren't going to be met, so I would be voting against this.
Do we have any motions?
I agree, this one's kind of limited, and it is, I agree, it's torn, but I certainly would love the sidewalk. But given the topo, I don't think that, what you did, they're ever gonna get enough housing on it to make that happen. The connectivity, I see, are you concerned that you want to get on the road and connect to the, you want both?
Yeah, I do, and just because, again, I think I've been, voted for that plan. Connectivity is important, and I feel like we are constantly looking for, I feel like we are not always consistent in ensuring that connectivity, and carving out one thing for here and one thing for there doesn't sit really well with me. It's hard to approve one that adds a cul-de-sac when we say no more cul-de-sacs. And then not extend this out. I realize it's not ideal. I wonder, again, I don't know enough about the traffic, but I wonder if, I would be curious as to what DOT would say. Would DOT, lower that, lower the speed limit around that corner? There was already access points out of that. We are talking about just 4 homes. I think it's possible. I'm not the expert. I want to hear what DOT has to say. So that's kind of why I'm feeling like this is almost there, but not quite.
We have a motion one way or another.
I'm very torn. I concur with the connectivity elements, the frontage elements. I agree with you there. I think we could get more out of this, but we are very limited in terms of site, location. It seems like there are some items that still needs to be addressed between the residents at Courtyards and the developer end. Yeah, I don't know.
Is the greenway, I know there's there's an easement being dedicated, but there's a fee in lieu. What would the cost of, I guess this is for the engineer, what is the cost of the greenway construction? Do you guys know? Have you done that? Because I could probably forego the sidewalk along the frontage if there was a pedestrian connection outside of the development to connect to something else.
I can't give you the price on that right now. I can tell you that the Greenway cross-section is extremely strict. I mean, you're basically building a road for that Greenway connection, just so you're aware. It's a 10-foot wide, but it's also very, very thick in concrete, and so it does have a significant cost to that. And I believe your payment in lieu has been based on that, to be honest. So it has to, the payment in lieu is based on the number of houses, but this is one of the reasons why they're like, okay, you're talking 4 houses and you're talking building a road. And frankly, those 4 houses can't build a road through the wetlands, and that's why the payment in lieu exists, so.
I want to thank the neighbors for coming out. I know on a Monday evening, in the middle of holiday season can be challenging, so I want to thank the neighbors for coming out, and I will make a motion to deny, is that the right word? Deny the request for rezoning case 22CZ20.
All right, we have a motion to deny. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And we have a second. Thank you.
Like, before we take a vote, I do want to just look at this, just take a step back. I think we're all kind of so buried into so many weeds. You mentioned something about potentially higher density or something else happening. I don't think the neighbors, if we were to put townhomes there, would appreciate that.
No, they would not.
I think if there was a road connection that were to come through this area, it makes the lot really unbuildable. I think the only option at this point is to have the extension. I just don't see it any other way. If we add an access point on the Holt Road, I think that's gonna have more cut-through traffic through a section of 55 plus where they're trying to eliminate traffic.
Yep.
You're also adding in life safety issues as far as accessing in and out on a curved area where it's narrow road is already kind of tough navigating as it is. So I think you're adding that in. I don't think increasing density there is the right thing to do. I don't think adding a road access point into that is the right way to go.
I agree.
I think the only thing in my mind that makes logical sense would be the extension of it. Another larger issue is, well, it would have been great had the property owner at the time of the connecting development have agreed. That would have probably been a longer road or access. They could have probably built it out and probably been a whole lot more functional. Unfortunately, they didn't come to terms at that point.
Yep.
That also doesn't mean that their property is forever no longer able to be rezoned. That was just their decision at the time that they felt was probably right for them and their family. I'm not sure what the offer was. It
Right.
could have been much of nothing, being that there's so much wetlands on it. It probably really wasn't worth much at that time. But the tides have changed, and I just think this just makes more logical sense at this point, what the developer is looking to do. If this is gonna be developed, that's probably the best outcome. I wouldn't go for seeing townhomes in this area.
I agree.
But if they were
Something higher
townhomes,
density.
it would be more occupancy, right? So would there be an access point on Holt then? if it was
I
a
don't think
town
that you
road?
could do both. If you had an access point there, you're pretty much making the site unusable.
I completely agree with everything that you just said, except I want DOT to tell me, right? Like I'm with you, this is not high density. And just feel like this is almost there. That's kind of where I am. And that's where I sit with the deny, but,
Well, I mean, staff already stated that they didn't feel they could put one there. If DOT is gonna tell it, wouldn't that be in time for town council? That wouldn't be with us.
I think that's the question on the table, but there's a motion, so
All right.
it
So,
can be approved or denied, and we can go from there.
so we have a motion and a second to deny. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposing?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so that motion fails. So Diane, how does that work? Do we take another motion?
Yep, you need
All
another
right.
motion, please.
So, do we have a motion that is approving 22CZ20?
I'll make a motion to approve the rezoning request.
All right.
Second.
I have a motion. Steve was a second.
I would like to add in before we take this motion that we make a note to council that they look into any type of HOA type concerns and just vet this out. Okay, because what we don't want is two things that are just, two properties don't look anything alike, don't act anything alike. I think that is in all fairness to the current residents. I think that needs to be evaluated and just noted to the council.
All right, so Alyssa, on your motion, how do we add in what Tim just asked us? Shelley?
You can, Alyssa can choose to amend her motion and simply say
I will amend my motion to include what was stated.
Tim stated, all right.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear very well. Was it a note to council to look into the Courtyard at Holt HOA's concerns? Is that what you said?
Do you want to repeat?
Was the, look into compatibility between the two. Between, yes, the covenants, neighborhood covenants.
I think the characteristic of
into-
the neighborhood is what I would propose.
Right, we can't, the covenants are not really an area
Well,
where
that
we
might
can
be a
do
future
zoning.
condition for the council. They might, I mean, that might be
It's
something
not
that could be
enforceable.
offered up.
It's not enforceable to require they have the same covenants, but I think Alyssa may have worded it where it could be.
Just compatible characteristics through, I think, the review of the subdivision plan. It sounds like that's kind of the next step to work through details within the staff level. Is that?
All right. Does that suffice, Shelley? Diane?
That's already been done, according to Shelley.
Okay.
I mean, it depends on what you mean by the characteristics. If you're asking to make certain that the architecture is compatible,
Right.
so the style, the size and scale, we can certainly do that when we get to that point. If you're asking us to make certain that there won't be children on this particular property, I don't think that that's something that we can do.
Right.
So it depends on what you mean by compatible,
Aesthetic.
aesthetics compatibility, okay?
All right. So,
Okay, oh, hang on, I'm gonna read it back to you. Note to council to look into compatible aesthetic characteristics between the land to be rezoned with Courtyard at Holt, period.
Yes, I will amend my motion with that language. Thank you.
Diane, I want to go back just for a minute to the motion that failed. Do you need additional notes or anything?
No, it failed, so I do not need any notes on that. What will happen with this one, I'm assuming there's going to be some dissenting votes. I do need the paperwork to be filled out for dissenting votes.
Okay.
Working on it now.
All right. So we have a motion from Alyssa and a second from Steve with some amending comments. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposing?
No.
Here, yes.
Two dissents? All right. So that motion does pass. 22CZ20 does pass. All right. Thank you. Let's move on then to item 2, to rezoning case 21 CZ 27 at Tingen Road Residential.
If the board doesn't mind, I'll wait a moment till everyone's left.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next project before you is rezoning case 21 CZ 27, Tingen Road Residential. This project is a little bit more south in the town's jurisdiction, kind of looking south central-ish. The property in front of you measures about 2.27 acres. It is south of Apex Elementary, just north of West Haven Townhomes, to the east of James Street Station and James Street Extension, and along the western side of the property is Tingen Road with single-family homes in that area. The project is currently zoned residential agricultural, and the applicant is proposing to rezone it to high-density multifamily conditional zoning. The 2045 land use map designates this as medium high-density residential, so it is consistent with the land use map. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on September 29th, 2021. That neighborhood meeting report is a part of your staff report. A letter of impact was received from Wake County Public Schools that stated that elementary and high schools within the area would be insufficient to handle the capacity of future growth in this area. However, they did state that within the next 5 years, additional construction or expansion may alleviate those concerns at both elementary and high school levels. The applicant is proposing to rezone this project with the following uses: townhouse, multifamily or apartment, utility minor, park active, park passive, greenway, and recreation facility private. The applicant has included several architectural conditions that are consistent with our typical townhouse conditions. Those are located on page 2 of your staff report. Since there's nothing unusual there, I will not read them aloud to you. We do, however, have several additional conditions that I will summarize for you. The applicant is committing to the following items. They're proposing to provide a 10-foot type A buffer along the adjacent property lines, so all property lines adjacent to other land, and then a 30-foot type B buffer along Tingen Road is proposed. They're also committing to providing at least 2 signs identifying environmentally sensitive areas in an attempt to discourage pet waste and chemical use in the area, as well as providing diverse and abundant pollinator sources, utilizing warm grasses throughout the development, providing conduit for future solar power within every home, and at least 2 pet waste stations within the open space. The property will be accessed via a right-in, right-out that's about 150 feet north of Harbor Haven Drive, pending review by NCDOT and Town of Apex. Harbor Haven's here, so that's pushing that almost as far north as we can get it. And that's just because there is such limited frontage along this property. In addition, the project is proposing to be 100% affordable for sale to buyers making less than 100% of the Raleigh AMI, with a minimum affordability period of no less than 10 years. So all of the townhomes within the development will be for sale and affordable housing. And that'll be done with an affordable housing provider such as Habitat for Humanity, the White Oak Foundation, DHIC, or a similar entity. And then the developer has added a condition. There is typically a 10-foot side path on the bicycle and pedestrian system plan map for Tingen Road. However, there's already a 5-foot sidewalk in that area, and it's their offer is that that sidewalk will remain, and because this is an affordable housing project, they will not construct the 10-foot side path or pay a fee in lieu for the cost of expanding that. In addition, future sub-street extensions will be provided to the west as well as to the north. The applicant met with the EAB on August 19th, 2021. Yeah. And those conditions are listed on pages 3 and 4. They included all but 2 conditions. One of those was to implement green infrastructure. This is a very vague condition, and it's one that I've been working with the EAB on. It simply has such a broad scope of applicability that it's difficult to narrow down at this particular time in a project how that would be implemented. Typically, green infrastructure is
LEED certified or?
It's actually more along the lines of using plants, trees, and greenery to clean stormwater, but within our town's rights of ways, and things like that. And at the moment, the town hasn't adopted standards for this, and we don't have the maintenance personnel for it. So staff actually recommended that they not include this because all of the roads within this area will be publicly maintained. The second item that was requested was to install 8 townhomes with a minimum of 4 kilowatt rooftop solar PV system. This development is anticipated to have between 16 and 20 townhomes on it. And since this is a 100% affordability project, the developer did not feel that they were able to make that commitment, since that would bump up the sales price of this and would essentially make it unaffordable to the same people that they wanted to make it affordable to. As with the last project, this development is small enough that it does not have to go to the Parks and Recreation Board for review, so it will also be paying a fee in lieu. And planning staff recommends approval of the rezoning with the conditions as proposed by the applicant. The applicant is here and is happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Shelley, can you show us again where that street is coming out, the right out? Is that coming right next to that home that's there?
Not exactly right next, but pretty close.
Okay. And there's gonna be the buffer there, right?
That's my understanding at the moment, but I haven't seen a sketch plan in some time, so I am not certain if I'm accurately recalling that or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I recall emails, I believe, about this property and concerns on lighting and things of that nature. How does that play into that first home there?
All of the lighting that's installed will meet the town specifications. Most of the lights that are going to be installed will either be private residential lights, which the town doesn't regulate in any way. We really don't want to have the conversation with people that you know, Mr. Skinner, you have to change your light bulb, your light fixture because it's causing glare. Now that said, any street lights will be installed, I think, in this location by the town, and will be the town's new fixtures. So they will meet the town's requirements, everything. I am not aware of any proposals for an amenity center of any kind, so there won't be anything of that nature. So that there shouldn't be the same amount of light that they might anticipate with, say, a commercial development going in next door.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Shelley?
Shelley, do you know if this new townhome community will have any connections to any of the adjacent existing ones?
Not at the moment. There are intervening properties that either aren't ready to develop at this point. The developer has attempted to purchase several of the properties, but has not been met with success. As is the example down here for Harbor Haven, there's no street stub there to connect to. And if one were to try to put a road through there, it would be far too close to the road, to the buildings there.
What about Owlsmore Lane? Is that like a future connection somehow?
There will be a stub street to this property, probably roughly in the lining up with Owlsmore. But at this point, there's a house in between that's still lived in, and that person isn't interested in selling yet. But I would anticipate that within the next dozen years or so, they would sell and that would be connected.
Where's that house's access?
So James Street Extension is actually a gravel road that extends down.
Okay.
So this was the original James Street. When James Street Station was built, they shifted the road over and then provided this for the houses that actually front right here.
Okay. Thank you.
But it's a gravel road, so you can't see it quite as clearly through the trees as you can asphalt.
Any other questions for Shelley? The applicant, care to speak?
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the owners and the applicant, Joey Iannone. Apologize, Joey. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and present this case. I'm going to keep my remarks brief. I think this one's fairly straightforward, and as always, Shelley's done a great job of kind of running through the details. I do want to hit a highlight associated with the location of this site. This really is a great opportunity for density in this location. If you look at where the property is located, the comprehensive plan calls for density consistent with what we're proposing. If you were to drive there from here, it's 1.7 miles away, and it's to the south, so it's got great proximity to downtown. We'll support downtown businesses. It's on a Go Apex route as of today. There's already a Go Apex route that passes by the site, so again, a great place to put people and give them opportunities for other than having to get into a vehicle. And it's consistent with the high-density multifamily zoning to the south of this site. So I think the combination of factors currently on the ground, as well as the future plans for the town, access to bus, access to downtown, really makes it a great place for density. It also makes it a great place for affordable housing. And super excited to see that my client was willing, and he was passionate about making this 100% affordable deal. When we walked into this property, I kind of advised Joey on the front end of the process, and this was, we filed back in, I want to say July, maybe August, so it was a while ago, but had told him that the town was still working on a policy associated with housing affordability, but the expectation should be that there needs to be an affordable housing commitment because it's a high priority for the town. Joey heard that loud and clear, and has a zoning condition that's going to require 100% of these units to be affordable. So I'm personally excited about that. I'm passionate about affordable housing. And again, in this location, along a Go Apex route, it really seems to check a lot of boxes in terms of where you want this type of housing. The last point that I'm going to make, the case that you're going to hear after this one is the Hatcher property. It's also a property that Joey is working on. It's not in proximity to this site. It's a much different project. And I raise it, and I'm not working on it. You're going to hear from Patrick Kiernan from Jones and Knaus, and he's the one who's going to be handling the presentation to you. But specifically as it relates to housing affordability, they were not able to make a commitment, as I understand, in that particular case associated with housing affordability. They're a large lot. I mean, you're looking at probably $1 million homes there, and it's just tough to be able to pair that off, and there's not a ton of lots. And so we would ask you all's consideration of the fact on Mr. Iannone's behalf that he's doing a 100% affordable deal in this location, and hopefully that offsets some concerns associated with not getting housing affordability on that other case. There was a question related to lighting and this property here. Joey's actually bought this property. So there's not currently a resident that will be there long term. Ultimately, when this zoning case is concluded, we anticipate filing a zoning case for that site as well and folding that into the zoning. So I just wanted to address that question because there were questions related to lighting and how that was going to impact folks who live there. And Joey, as the owner, is fine with it.
So that brings a different question up. Does the driveway change for
Yep.
this neighborhood?
Yeah, and so you know, we had worked with Russell on the front end of the process, just talking about how access to the site was going to be located. And as you saw, we've got a condition saying that it's going to be right in, right out. We recognize not the most ideal situation. One of the reasons why Joey has been pursuing other properties in the area to get further away from Harbor Haven and provide for better access to the site. We're optimistic. I don't know the definitive answer associated with how that's going to be handled, but optimistic that it will provide better flexibility associated with access to this collection of sites in here. And as Shelley mentioned, there's a street stub that's going to be provided to this larger site here, and then a street stub to the west. Ultimately, when that site develops, there'll be a connection to Owlsmore Lane. I'm here to answer any questions that you folks may have. Jeff Roach with Peak Engineering has been handling engineering and planning and can answer questions if they are technical.
Any questions for the applicant?
I have a technical engineering question for Mr. Roach. Real quick, Jeff. Is sewer still an issue in this area, sewer capacity? Because doesn't this all flow to a pump station that's capped?
I think it's all been routed a different direction recently.
Okay.
I think it's going west, where this one will continue down to the pump station south of, right there on US 1. But we haven't even gotten to the level of looking at it, and with, with 20 lots, we're looking at 7,000 gallons a day. So it's a relatively small amount to it, but that's something we'll get into more with the master subdivision than we are at zoning at this point. So, best answer I can give you at this point.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, let's move to the public hearing section. Do we have anyone here from public hearing? Have you already signed in, sir? I have not. All right. Come forward, please. State your name and then sign in at the tail end.
Okay. My name's Marty Tanis. I live in West Haven Townhomes. So I have a few comments about this application. When the developer requested a rezoning last year, our homeowners association at West Haven submitted a letter to the developer requesting a few considerations. And I did not see the mention of, the mention of these considerations in the new application. So I wanted to bring those to your attention. Primarily looking at the stormwater runoff from that property to our north into our, there's like a creek that goes through their property and then through our property, and there's been erosion within this proposed development's property, depositing sand and silt into our creek bed. So one of our main concerns is that the stormwater be addressed to, keep our neighborhood sound. And we had requested along the property line between the properties that there be a fence added into the 10-foot buffer so that there's extra separation between communities. And the last thing that I would mention is the gentleman that just mentioned the house that's no longer occupied will be requested to be rezoned sometime down the road, which sounds like lots of opportunity for things that don't match this rezoning request. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, your name?
Should be on the list. It's Phil Welch.
Gotcha.
Okay. Good evening, board members, staff. My name is Phil Welch. I live at 1471 Big Leaf Loop. I chair Apex's Housing Advisory Board. I also chair the Western Region Affordable Housing Action Group's advocacy team. And I participated on the steering committee that put together the Apex's Affordable Housing Plan a couple years ago, 2020. I'm commenting as a town of Apex resident, not in my capacity of any other thing, on this rezoning case, 21CZ 27. I understand this will be 100% affordable housing with up to 20 owner-occupied townhouses, built by an experienced affordable housing developer such as Habitat, Wake, White Oak Foundation, or DHIC. I think it's great that Apex will be adding up to 20 homes so close to Apex Elementary School. And it's also going to be close to other resources such as the downtown business district. I believe that affordable housing units are to be occupied by low or median income households earning no more than 100% of the Raleigh, North Carolina area median income, adjusted for family size. The housing needs assessment in the affordable housing plan stated that over the next decade, Apex is projected to add 1,900 jobs with incomes below $75,000, which will further contribute to the town's affordable housing need. 2 years ago, this included essential jobs such as grocery cashiers, firefighters, and registered nurses. Given the large number of single wage earner households now, I would hope that some of these homes could be priced to be affordable to households earning no more than about 80% of the area median income. This would translate to annual incomes of about $60,000 to $85,000 for one-person to four-person households based on the 2022 HUD area median incomes. I see that these affordable homes will include a minimum affordability period of no less than 10 years. However, the Housing Advisory Board is recommending a minimum affordability term of 20 years. I believe that both Habitat Wake and the White Oak Foundation typically provide affordability terms of at least 20 years. I would suggest that the town staff look into increasing the affordability term for these townhouses to at least 20 years. I strongly support the planning board voting to forward this rezoning request to the town council with a recommendation to approve the rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Any other public comments? All right, I will close the public comment and bring it back to the board for further discussion or possible motion.
I just have one question, another technical question for you, Mr. Roach. The neighboring townhome HOA brought about some concerns, and one of which obviously is stormwater attenuation. The water feature that shows kind of where your sewer stub is that a buffered feature or is that just a draw? Have you guys?
It's partially buffered about 100 feet or so into the site, and it stops. So about where the cursor is, right, Mr. Akers, I don't know if you can see this on the screen.
Yep.
About right here is where the buffered stream stops. The rest of it is just an ephemeral channel north of it.
So when you guys develop this, presumably at a higher density, you have a stormwater feature that would attenuate to the...
Absolutely. The goal is to have, at this point with concepts and sketch plans, as you're well aware, we've got a erosion control basin here during construction that will convert into a water quality, total suspended solids, detention in that kind of southwest corner of the total development. We don't know if the erosion is coming from our side or if it's coming from the school upstream. We know that the town staff has been out there to evaluate it, and they haven't been on the site to say, yes, it's yours, or it's the guy upstream. So that's part of what we'll evaluate at master subdivision, but we are doing a stormwater pond on site that we think will slow down the erosion control. It'll capture any runoff that's coming off of our site into that pond. If it's coming from the school, it's gonna continue.
The receiving pipe between the townhomes is down, located towards the front, yeah, right there?
Yep.
Are you able to, I'm just trying to think out loud, just because if they're seeing issues with sedimentation now during construction, how can you address that?
I mean, you know, double layers of silt fence as best we can. Because it's a buffered stream, we can't come and cross it here at the bottom of the property line. So what will happen is we'll control our road construction as best we can, put in a fairly large erosion control basin on the west side, divert as much water there. We'll have erosion control, outlet, of course, silt fence, outlet devices, protection as best we can, double layers of silt fence. So we're gonna take a bunch of pictures before we start, and we'll leave that area no worse off than what we got, what it is when we start. So we always do that now.
I 100% believe you, because I know you're gonna do it right, but because the code minimum is not double silt fence, would you commit to double silt fence?
Yeah, I mean, as a zoning condition or as a personal?
Well, I just
mean,
don't know, because assuming you walked away, right, and then
Yeah.
he's got, I mean, it's so low fruit, I know you would do it, and it's
Oh, yeah.
so benign, but.
Well, we've been called by town staff already. James and I already talked about the site, when he went out 6 or 8 months ago to look at it and found the sediment in there. And I committed to him at that point that when we do the erosion control plans, we're gonna look into it, we're gonna do everything we can to identify where it's coming from. And if it truly is coming from our side, is to stabilize the heck out of it as quick as we can. So I know that, like we said, if it's an affordable, if it's Habitat or DHI, IC or whoever it is, they're gonna wanna get in there, build those units, get the affordability in there as quick as they can. It's not like we're gonna build one house this year, one house the next year, and it's gonna be there for 8 years building. It's gonna be as quick as they can get them up. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Any other questions while I'm up
I
here?
say, before you leave, thank you for addressing the stormwater erosion. Can you speak to, the fence and potential buffer?
Yeah, absolutely. So we went and upgraded the entire buffer around the site to an A buffer instead. So what will happen is we'll be supplementing if there's some trees and landscaping there that don't quite meet that. We'll supplement with shrubs or evergreen trees to provide more of a block for those neighbors that are existing down there. Adding a fence, personal opinion, I'm not a fence fan, because the minute you put it into that 10-foot buffer, you have to take out vegetation to install a fence. So I think the landscaping that's there is usually better than me trying to recreate and make it better. That's my opinion. That's why I don't commit to a fence initially. Habitat built, as you guys know, we did the Casena Lane project over here as well. And there was a fence commitment on the western boundary of that site, the worst commitment I ever made. Because it's on a slope, the apartments are set, 20 feet above these homes, and here you've got this wood screen fence that's basically blocking landscaping. So we try not to commit to fences, not because I don't think they should be done, but in this case, you basically commit 2 projects that are exactly the same. Townhomes on the south, townhomes on the north. The back of our townhomes will face the back of their townhomes. The elevation change is not that significant. It's not a 20-foot elevation change. So committing to a fence, I'd rather not, simply because it creates 2 very different, hey, it's those neighbors versus these neighbors. So that's the only reason we don't commit to it this early, Ms. Sherman.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Again, just my personal opinion.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Anything else, you guys? Technical, if not, Jason.
Would there be consideration for the 20-year affordable period?
I think, I don't want to say part of the challenge, we've considered it and happy to consider increasing that. I just need to talk to Joey. In terms of a 20-year, right now, we don't know who's going to develop the site. And I've worked with Habitat on a number of projects. Habitat will do 20 years. I don't want to rule out the possibility that if Habitat decides to pass on it, or DHIC or White Oak, that they don't want to do it. So part of what we were doing in terms of providing the 10-year commitment is really making sure we've got flexibility to be able to entertain the most potential suitors for who would build the site, because right now we don't have an agreement with them. We've talked to Habitat and have kind of a general understanding.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then do I understand correctly that Habitat does typically do, Mr. Welch, 80% AMI at 20 years? Typically, that is the case?
Yeah, that's my experience as
So-
well on the
so
other
if that
deals
is-
that I've worked on.
So if that is the case, then that would be a reasonable condition to, I understand you're opening it to a wide range of suitors, but that we would say our preference would be 80% AMI at 20 years.
Yeah, and personally, my preference would be 80% at 20 years. Again, because Habitat is not under contract to buy these lots as of today, I'm concerned about making those commitments without knowing exactly who is going to build the site. And the 100% AMI, whether Habitat does it or somebody else decides to come along, is a number that we feel comfortable somebody will pick it up and build the units. So, I mean, I'm not comfortable committing to a zoning condition along those lines. The people that Joey has been talking to as of today are people who would be far exceeding the expectations that we're putting into the condition that exists today. I'm just trying to be super flexible in making sure that the affordable reality associated with the site gets met, whether it's Habitat or somebody else.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, sir.
For that additional lot, I know it's not part of this initial project, but the additional lot that Joseph owns, do you foresee that adding additional affordable units as part of this project at a later date or something else?
Joey says yes. I would say we can't predict the future, but my client says yes, so take his word for it.
So I gotta ask a silly question. Why would we not look at this whole thing as one complete?
It was timing. He didn't buy the property till long after we were into the zoning process. So my advice to him was, let's go ahead and close this one out, bring the second one back. It will fold in nicely with everything else that we're doing.
Any other questions or possible motion?
I'd like to make a motion.
Before you make a motion? I said before you make a motion.
Oh, okay.
I have to tell you that, the Housing Advisory Board, I also serve on Met, and it's interesting to see this come before us at 100% AMI, because we were discussing 80%, 100%, 120%, and so it's interesting. I'm excited about this project. Thank you for addressing the stormwater erosion. I am with you on the green fencing myself. I prefer green fencing, but that is not what the neighbors asked, so I would ask the neighbors, gave an answer, developer gave an answer. If you would like to see something different, please, if this is approved, discuss that at town council. I would like to see 80% at 20 years. And so I would love to, for the board to consider adding that as a condition, as you were proceeding with your motion.
So Sarah, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the rezoning 21 CZ 27 with the condition that Tina stated.
So a condition of 80% AMI?
80% in 20 years.
Hang on, I gotta type it. With one additional condition.
To consider the increase to.
I question if Mr. Barron, if they don't have a purchaser lined up, does that jeopardize the ability of the fruition for this to happen?
That was my question there. Is this gonna shut it down and we don't need to?
I don't know the answer because I don't know what that means to go to 20 years.
How much does it limit the pool of buyers or developers?
Yeah, I'd like to rescind my motion back to my pocket.
Well, I think before you rescind it.
Okay, no, I rescinded it.
Okay,
We can make another motion.
How would, if you were to change this to 80% AMI, is that going to change the building construction to a lesser product? Being that those that can't afford, you can't construct it and give it away for free.
Right. I mean, it obviously changes the pool of buyers, right?
Right.
And so there's, buyers at 100% AMI have more spending capacity than buyers at 80%. So,
Sure.
From a Habitat standpoint, again, Habitat's mentioned in the condition. We've had conversations with Habitat. They're not under contract. It would be great if they ended up building it. And if they do, it wouldn't change the quality of what Habitat does just because of how they go about it. I think that if I could ask and I understand where you're coming from, Ms. Sherman, I do, in terms of wanting 20 years and wanting 80%. And again, personally, I don't disagree with that. I would ask you to kind of weigh that in the balance. If we were standing up in front of you and said we had 5% of the units at 80% AMI for 20 years, is that a better deal than 100% of the units at 100% AMI at 10 years? And I recognize that you hate to ask for trade-offs, but I think that is the trade-off that we're talking about here. We will consider it as, after tonight, and we'll take a look, and I'll talk to Joey about whether he can make an additional commitment beyond tonight. We're just not prepared to do that tonight, just out of concern associated with how it impacts the ability to develop a site.
So again, and please correct me, Mr. Welch, if I'm wrong. If we're looking at the Habitat and DHIC and White Oak, aren't we looking at buyers, suitors, that would be at 80% in 20 years?
I can't speak to White Oak. I don't know what they would do. And again, we have mentioned them specifically in the condition, but the condition allows other similarly situated buyer developers of affordable homes to come in and build these out. So the condition mentions those three organizations as to kind of create an expectation in terms of who is going to do it, but there is the possibility it could be somebody else that doesn't do 80% AMI for 20 years. And that's really...
Theoretically, pardon me.
Okay.
Theoretically, it could be someone that comes in and does 20% at 80%, 20%
Right.
of the product at 80%, even 60%. So you're not necessarily locking it in. But I would go back to the 10-year just because I think after even 15 years, you do see housing naturally folding over into an affordable product because it's not the newest thing on the market. So just would like the board to consider that just a little bit longer term. And I think you've named really quality affordable housing developers that would be amenable to that.
So if I could just interject, we've had meetings with Habitat in the past, not recently, but within the last year, and they were having trouble finding folks who would qualify at those lower levels. When you're talking about 80%, even 100%, that's rental. That's rental. That is not a homeowner. They cannot afford to buy and maintain a home. You don't want someone in there that's going to end up, not being able to keep up, with the maintenance.
Right.
And so, even what we heard on Friday at the Housing Advisory Board, I don't think it's an unreasonable number that they've proposed. I think 80 would be way too low for purchase product.
What is the 100% AMI for this MSA? Do we have that?
Depends on the household size, but for a family of four, it's $110,100. That's the area median income, which means half the households are above that and half are below. And Diane can confirm that.
I actually can't. It's our housing staff that would have to confirm that, and Michael's out sick, so we don't have anyone here today.
Alyssa, I'm sorry, were you encouraging 20 years, or were you, I missed that, if you were
Not
saying 10 or if you were advocating for more?
I feel like this is me not being an affordable housing expert, quite frankly, but I do feel like after about 15 years or so, you start to see homes naturally becoming affordable because there are other newer homes on the market. So it's just the nature of residential real estate. I mean, maybe not recently, in the past 3 years, but just as a consideration, because I totally understand the AMI piece of that, and I don't want to lock you in if someone wants to be more creative with how they structure a development deal there.
Can I get signed in and speak?
Do we have a?
I didn't
Yeah.
sign in. Can I get signed in?
Sure. Come on. Your name, sir?
Joseph. Vincent Ione. All right.
And to be clear, you're part of the applicant?
I'm sorry?
You're the applicant?
I am the applicant.
All right.
I just want to say two things. I have got a letter of intent from Habitat, and I want to do what Habitat wants done, okay? Number two, I can't believe that I'm standing up here trying to give you 20 affordable housing, and you're arguing about it. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Well, Joey, respectfully, I see my role on this board as to, to advocate for the citizens of the town. And you're right, we need 20 affordable units. I just wanna make sure, I'm excited, let me be clear, I'm excited that this is a 100% property. I'm excited it's 20, but also, I wanna get the most for our community. And so that is why I'm going to ask, that is why I'm going to push, that is exactly why. And so I am going to ask.
So giving you 100% is not enough.
I was gonna ask for 80. Whether you give it to me or not, that's entirely different. But I'm going to ask for 80. I also don't go to a car lot and pay sticker price. I always ask for less. Thank you. I was not clear if we were gonna go for 20 years or not, but I'm ready to make a motion.
Do what Habitat wants. That's what
I would love to do what Habitat wants.
So you have a motion.
I wasn't clear if we were interested in going for 20. I am.
Well, I'd like to speak before we make a motion.
Yes, sir.
I think this is fantastic. And a year ago, we'd have been jumping up and down, hanging from the ceiling fan right there. And and you're right. We want 80, but they could structure it, and they could, it's better than 60% at 100 and 40% at 80, and they could structure it 100 different ways. But it's a fantastic deal, all in all. And we've been pushing for this, and I do agree with wanting the 80. And Habitat, they said that they've got a LOI, which is not a contract, but a letter of intent. We're moving in that direction, and I don't want to stop that. This is we need the affordable housing.
Sounds like a great motion.
Yes, it does.
I think it's fantastic, and I think we should make a motion to approve as provided by the applicant.
A second.
I realize I like the 80. I do. Everybody wants more. Just don't want to lose it because
Yeah,
you can structure it.
absolutely
You could have some 80 and some 120, and it all equals 100. And hey, this is fantastic. I just like it.
So Keith, you're making a motion.
Making a motion. Yes.
I'll second it.
All right.
I do agree with what you were saying.
Yep, I
Not that I
appreciate
don't.
it. I absolutely appreciate it. I'm just always gonna ask. I can't take the bottom line off of it.
All right, so I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposing? 21 CZ 27 passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, Shelley. Public hearing and possible motion for rezoning case 22 CZ 12, the Hatcher property.
Imagine seeing y'all here. Oh, we had one email, sorry. So Hatcher property, as we discussed, is clear on the other side of town. It is over here kind of in the westernmost portion of the town's jurisdiction. Y'all were here not very long ago, in your minds anyway. This is just south of the Legacy PUD that was just approved at the end of the year, last year. This project measures about 28.8 and some change acres. It is, as you can see, mostly wooded. There are a few pieces of stream on the property. There's also a large Duke Electric easement here. And what's harder to see is there's actually another Town of Apex utility easement in this general direction. This was previously a tree farm for many, many years. So currently it is in Wake County's jurisdiction, and it is zoned R80W, as is pretty much everything around it. So this one will be up for annexation for town council as well. The applicant is proposing to rezone it to rural residential conditional zoning. That limits it to 1 unit per acre as the density. Currently, the 2045 land use map designates this as rural density residential, which is that 1 unit per 5 acres on the land use map. As y'all might remember, we recently added a designation because we realized that when we updated the land use map the last time, we took away the 1 unit per acre designation on the plan, even though we still have a zoning district that has that. So this is the one that we talked about names for a little while. Town council decided to make this the rural transition residential district. And if this rezoning is approved, then it will the land use map will automatically update to that designation. The applicant has divided this parcel into Zone A and Zone B. Zone A is intended to be 2 houses, one for him and one for his daughter. Zone B is intended to be a single-family subdivision, again with an average density of 1 unit per acre. The reason why you see the edge of it's kind of twisty a little bit is because Transit Trail is shown on this plan, and the applicant will be constructing and realigning Transit Trail as a part of this development. They will also be taking it from a private road, which it currently is, to a public road throughout their frontage. Transit Trail currently is just a private road. On the town's 2040, on the town's transportation plan, it's shown providing a north-south connection between Olive Chapel Road and 64. Legacy Station PUD is going to build their portion along their through their frontage down to approximately right here. And this piece will we'll finish up a good portion of that, leaving a fairly small chunk in between. As a part of that, they added a little curve in there, partly to help us to do a land swap with some of the neighbors on the west side of the road, but partly also to add a little bit of a slowdown for people using the road, because we all know how fast we like to drive when it's nice and straight out there. So, the project abuts the Army Corps of Engineers here to the south. It's probably a little easier to see here. This entire dark area down here is all Army Corps land. And then on this side here, this is the American Tobacco Trail. On this side is Smith Farm, and then this is a piece that Wake County owns. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on April 27th, 2022. Because the property changed size, increased in size after the original meeting, they were required to go back and have a second neighborhood meeting. That was done on December 5th this year, so just last week. The meeting reports for each meeting are attached to the staff report. Wake County Public Schools gave us a letter of intent that stated elementary and high school students will not have sufficient capacity for future students, but that expansion or construction within the next 5 years may address those concerns at the high school level. The applicant is proposing to rezone to the following uses: single family, accessory apartment, utility minor, greenway, park active, and park passive. Since the applicant's broken it into 2 pieces, as I said, and this is because we have 2 different sets of zoning conditions applying to this. Because one piece, the larger one, is a subdivision that will be constructed and will be sold in the normal way, and the other piece is his own personal home and his daughter's home with different lot sizes. Those have separate conditions to them. So I'm going to do my best to lay out to you which conditions are the same and which ones are different. The architectural conditions are very similar. There are slightly fewer of them on Zone A. Zone A says that vinyl siding is not permitted. Windows and decorative details are permitted, however. Eaves will project at least 12 inches out from the wall of the structure. Garage doors will have decorative details, windows, or carriage-style adornments like we normally have. A varied color palette shall be used with at least 3 color families. And house entrances for units with front-facing single-car garages will have a prominent covered stoop, as well as all front porches will be a minimum of 6 feet deep. Section B incorporates all of those and a few additional ones as well. The additional ones include additional decorative elements, 3 of them on the sides facing front lots, restricts the garages to no more than 40% of the total width of the house and the garage together. So making sure that the garage is not the biggest portion of the house that you can see. And The rear and side elevations of units that can be seen from the right-of-way will have trim around the windows. As far as architectural conditions, those are the differences. Now we get into the additional conditions. The building setbacks for both are identical, as is the maximum building height, which is 40 feet, and the maximum built upon area per lot is 60%. That's identical for both pieces. It is a slight increase over the typical rural residential standard, which is normally 50% for single family. In addition, one moment. All the homes on both sites will have solar conduit in the building design to facilitate additional rooftop solar, and all the garages will have a 220 volt outlet inside the garage to facilitate charging electric vehicles. The developer will also construct transit trail according to the Apex Thoroughfare and Collector Street plan on a 60-foot public right-of-way from Olive Chapel Road to the northern boundary of the property. There are two different timing standards on this, however. Both pieces will have a 10-foot side path along the eastern side of the street. In the first, the Zone A says within the, to be dedicated at the time of the first plat of the subdivision. And Zone B says that it will, actually Zone A says that if this is the first one platted, that it will, that the road will stop here. Whereas if Zone B says that if it's the first one platted, the road will be built all the way to the northernmost property line. So that's the difference on those two. All the existing lots of record abutting transit trail within Town of Apex jurisdiction that are abutting transit trail at the time it's dedicated will each be entitled to a maximum of 2 driveway access points onto transit trail. So essentially that means that if there are 3 lots here on the right that will be within the town's jurisdiction at that time that the road is dedicated, if there's only 3, then they will each be allowed 2 driveway access points. But if the lots are further subdivided after that point, then those new lots will not be permitted direct access to the road. They'll have to have a separate road network of their own in order to access transit trail. Essentially what that's getting at is trying to make sure that these 2 lots that are going to be here eventually are able to have driveway accesses. Typically we see that restricted to 1. After discussion with the applicant, he would prefer to have 2 for his daughter's property, and that's why that's phrased that way. This one will be subdivided further, so it will have to have its own road network. None of these lots will access it directly. In addition, one second. For both parcels, construction shall be restricted to Monday through Saturday, and in order to allow a reprieve from the noise on Sundays. For any as well as for any existing residences that have access to transit trail as a private street currently. So anyone who is currently living along the road, whether inside or outside of our jurisdiction, the developer will create a temporary access drive adjacent to it so that while the road's being paved and constructed, nobody loses access to their homes and there's no problem getting to and from. Once the road is open for public access, that private access drive will be removed. So we don't have any problems with anybody losing access to their homes by accident. That's consistent for both parcels. So all of those that I just read are all consistent for both parcels. We have some additional conditions for Zone B, however, and I'm just going to kind of go through some of those. There's an additional stormwater condition where they are agreeing to meet the 25-year storm in this area. They have agreed to a specific zoning condition of 1 unit per acre. The average lot size will be ½ acre. The applicant will provide signage around SCMs about reducing pet waste and chemicals near the SCMs. They'll install pollinator-friendly and native flora within those SCM planting areas. At least 75% of the plant species used in the landscape design will be native species. Any of the perimeter buffers, SCMs, or other HOA-maintained areas may be planted with clover or warm season grasses for drought resistance. HOA covenants shall also permit clover lawns throughout the neighborhood in order to reduce water consumption and promote pollinator-friendly habitat. At least 1 pet waste station will be installed. HOA covenants will not restrict the construction of accessory dwelling units. Any outdoor lighting within the HOA-maintained areas will have full cutoff fixtures with a maximum color temperature of 3,000 Kelvin. Again, that's that nice warm yellow color instead of the harsh blue color. As well as the applicant is providing a 50-foot type A buffer along the eastern boundary line adjacent to the American Tobacco Trail. That's consistent with the town's Unified Development Ordinance. A 10-foot type A streetscape buffer will be provided along the east of Transit Trail where it runs through the green. A 10-foot type B buffer will be provided along the northern and southern boundary lines. This is a reduction from what we would normally see along the northern boundary line. That's because the properties to the north are currently designated as forestry. So normally what we would see is a 50-foot buffer. However, that's the same family that sold Mr. Ione the land for this. And I've been sent a letter that states that they're in support of the reduced buffer width, which is why staff is willing to support it. A perimeter buffer is not going to be provided along the southeastern boundary line where it touches the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Instead, the applicant's going to provide a split rail wooden fence along that project boundary. That'll give us a physical barrier between their property and the developer's property, as well as a visual barrier so people don't go wandering off thinking that belongs to them, without impeding any wildlife movement. So one other thing to keep in mind is this property also falls off dramatically in this area. Army Corps land is almost always low-lying because it's intended to preserve and maintain the clean water of our water reservoirs. So there's a pretty dramatic drop-off, and I think Patrick told me it's like 30 or 40 feet at least. It may be more than that. And it's fairly steep, so the likelihood of people deciding on their own that they want to wander down that is fairly low. In addition, on the town side on the interior of the property, the town has 2 large underground utility easements that run very close to the edge of that property line. And they are wet utilities, which means we can't put any trees or shrubs in them at all. So in order to have any kind of a buffer in this area, Mr. Ione would actually have to start from the interior portion of those perimeter or of those utility lines and then provide additional landscaping between there and the houses. And then we still probably wouldn't have a fence, and it would take some time for it to grow up. So staff went back and forth with this one with the developer several times, and because of just the context of this land, because of the steep slope, because it's Army Corps land to the south, because it's got those weird utility easements where they are, we decided that we felt like in this situation we could support that split rail fence because it would have been 10 feet of buffer and 40 feet of utility easement otherwise. And this will give probably the best combination of options while still respecting the Army Corps land and the animal life that lives within. The applicant is the proposed conditions about transit trail do state that this will meet the standards of the thoroughfare and collector street plan. Transit trail is designated as a future major collector. As I said earlier, it's planned to extend north through Legacy and connect to 64. The Apex Bike and Pedestrian System Plan map calls for that side path on the eastern side. And the applicant is proposing to meet those conditions.
Your time's up.
All right, I'm done. The Apex Environmental Advisory Board held a meeting with the applicant on April 21st. The zoning conditions suggested by the EAB are listed below. The EAB included 12 conditions. The applicant included all of them except for one. The one that was not included was recommending the installation of 4 kilowatt solar system on at least 6 of the homes. The applicant is only going to be able to get a total of 28 homes on here, including the 2 that he's building for his and his family. So, 25? All right, I was wrong. I was doing math in my head and I was wrong. So 25, and taking 6 of those for solar is a fairly significant proportion of that, and he was not able to make that work. After the EAB meeting happened was also when we had that size increase that caused them to have that land increase that caused them to go back and have a new neighborhood meeting. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there's a section in the UDO that describes what's exempted from having to go back to the EAB, and that was not exempted. So Mr. Ione's project had to go back one more time. At that time, the applicant proposed or presented all of the conditions that they had already agreed to. Those are also listed in your staff report, starting at the bottom of page 5. All of those were recommended. The only additional condition that was added was the solar panel system was adjusted. At that point, it was he was asked to reduce it from 6 lots to 2. Instead, he said that that wasn't something that he felt that he could do. Instead, he added a condition that stated that on the entrance sign for the subdivision, there's always a sign that says homes coming soon, built by. He's going to add a prominent section on that sign that says that solar panels are available if someone wants them. And we have actually found that that increases the number of people who decide to purchase those with their home at the time that it's constructed. Yes, sir? Car charger. And the car charger. I was getting there. And he also added the 220-volt electric chargers inside the garages.
I'm sorry, was that car charger part of what's going to be on the sign? Or was
No, it was, instead of doing the solar panel, he offered the 220 electric charger inside as well. So like the other 2 projects that we have already seen today, this project is too small to go to the Parks and Rec Advisory Commission. It will also be dedicating a fee in lieu as well. Planning staff recommends approval of the petition with the following change. So when I was reading through the transit trail condition, I noted to you that there's a couple different timing triggers for the different pieces. Staff is only concerned with changing the language for the Zone A, so that red piece down at the bottom. And basically, we would like to have the language be changed from at the time of the first plat of the subdivision to be dedicated prior to recording a subdivision plat, whether so exempt or otherwise for Zone A. We just simply want additional specificity. So the way that Mr. Ione is planning to subdivide those 2 parcels, or the land that's shown in the red earlier, is through what's called an exempt plat. An exempt plat is exempt because state legislation specifically exempts certain categories of subdivisions from having to follow local municipalities' rules. And this is totally common. It's not trying to get around anything. It's just something that's in state law that everyone lives with. And in this particular situation, exempt plats don't typically require right-of-way dedication. You are actually prohibited from providing right-of-way dedication at the same time. So all we're asking for is that before that exempt plat gets recorded with Wake County, Mr. Ione has to basically provide us with a separate right-of-way plat to dedicate this portion of the right-of-way. So, and again, that's only the piece that's in red right now. We're just asking for greater specificity so that it's clear that that at the time of first subdivision plat actually means exempt or otherwise. If that change is made, then staff recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. The applicant's engineer is here, and the applicant is also here, so they're also welcome or happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Shelley?
And once again, sorry, just as a reminder, the applicant is requesting that the Tingen Road affordable housing lots be considered to also provide affordable housing for this parcel. Since it was 100% affordable housing for 16 to 20 lots there, and this is only about 25 large lots of, large homes in a different type of subdivision entirely. Sorry, sir.
Oh, fine. So this property borders the American Tobacco Trail to the east. Will there be any connections made to that trail to promote any connectivity?
To the best of my knowledge, no. But the reason for that is not really a town issue so much as it is the group that maintains that and handles the the accesses to it is very, very restrictive about how many connections you can have and where they can be. And there's actually a tiny little piece of land just on the other side of the street right here that provides access. So they would be able to come down through the sidewalk along Olive Chapel and access the ATT there, or there will be a connection through Legacy Station. And once that road connection is built, they'll be able to access that up through Legacy Station. So it is very close by. It's simply not a part of this particular development.
You mentioned, what kind of easement is it? What kind of utility line is parallel to the American Tobacco Trail in Zone B? Is that the gas pipeline?
So this one here is actually a Duke Electric easement.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's overhead electric.
It is. And it is actually offset from the American Tobacco Trail. The black lines for the property lines are hard to see, but it's offset from the ATT by about 50 feet.
So the buffer that you mentioned, would it be from the property line or from, would it be from the property line and include the utility line?
It would be measured from the property line. So it would include whatever's there at the moment, and then if it's less than 50 feet there,
whatever the utility
then it might
line.
include a portion of the utility line, yes. I think, though, that when I measured this the last time, it should be 50 feet of existing trees right here.
Any other questions for Shelley? Does the applicant want to speak?
Hello, everybody. Mr. Chair, members of the board, good evening. My name is Patrick Kiernan with Jones & Knosson, 221 North Salem Street. And I'm here representing the applicant, Joey Ione, JBI Building and Development. First off, good job. This is a complicated puzzle put together, as you can probably tell. Shelley was very patient and understanding of a lot of the changes we made along the way, so I had probably about 7 or 8 minutes worth of stuff to talk about, and I think you've allowed me to whittle it down to just a couple points here. First, to speak on the affordability, understanding that this project on its own is offering none. We did meet with CJ Valenzuela, who was the former housing manager, and he took one look at it, saw the lot sizes, saw the market rate that these will be going for, and thought, no way, this, you'll never be able to make it work. I told him at the time, the benefit is that we are planning on moving these two rezonings together all throughout the process. He thought that was fantastic. I believe he said he came from California, and they do off-site affordability type setup all the time there. So he was totally in favor of, if one project had 100%, this one that doesn't make as much sense, let's leave it off. So I did want to touch on that. The other thing that Shelley mentioned about Transit Trail, and as it relates to Legacy PUD, the Legacy PUD that was approved not too long ago actually sectioned off the southeastern corner down here, much more than what's shown on the screen, as a potential Wake County school site. My understanding is that Wake County will only be interested in that school site, presuming they have access pretty much all the way through, especially to the south out to Olive Chapel Road. It's about 2,200 feet total between Legacy PUD and Olive Chapel Road, and this development would complete about 1,500 feet, which is almost 75% of that connection. That gap that you see right through here, between us and the engineers that are working on the Legacy PUD, have been in contact with the landowners through here. We think there's a preliminary road alignment that doesn't affect their homes. There will be utility connections crossing those adjacent property owners. And all things said, that gap I think is one that can be bridged. Not literally, but so I just wanted to make that point very clear. I think especially that it's being built as a collector street standards, it's obviously a higher infrastructure cost related to that. What that cost difference would come out to, I can't say. I know it'll be, it's a rather significant pavement structure and a wider street for a collector street, as opposed to if it wasn't shown on the collector street plan and this was just a regular residential street access point, it would be less significant. So there's a cost burden associated with that. And I do think that it's to the benefit of the town that this road is being proposed, 3/4 of the way to that PUD. Let's see, the last thing I wanted to make note of in regards to solar and the absence of that condition. My client, Mr. Ione, he's a custom home builder. He's been doing work in Apex for decades. The product that he puts out is phenomenal. I think he has seen, especially in recent years, the price point that these are going at, especially given the condition about solar conduit being provided on every home, the addition of the verbiage on the development marketing sign, solar options available. We anticipate more than two, would likely be built throughout this development. It is not a matter of trying to avoid solar. It's more of, these are going to be totally customizable homes. Everything about them are going to be, newly architected and fully customizable. We would like each individual home buyer to have the option, if they want this lot here and they want solar, great. If they want this lot here and they don't want solar, let them have that flexibility. What the zoning condition does is requires us to designate which lots are going to have solar at the time. I know sometimes it's plat, sometimes it's master subdivision plan. Yeah. So even still, we're designating before homes are built and plans are made which ones will have solar. So it's more of just not wanting to squeeze it into a zoning condition that becomes zoning law, that these two lots are designated for solar. So that's the only reason that it's absent. Like I said, it's not a aversion to installing solar. I think, especially the 220 volt outlet that's being installed in the garage was also another just kind of, that's another way of approaching that renewable energy topic. That that's something that we can provide in every home. I understand it's not super easily enforceable by the zoning compliance officers, but we've seen in other projects where it's been allowed to be a condition. So obviously you know, the vast majority of the Environmental Advisory Board recommendations are being met, and or exceeded. So we feel like it's a great project altogether. Meets the intent of the 2045 land use map, given the new designation. We were part of the planning committee meetings, and I think this rezoning was kind of on the forefront of everybody's minds when they were thinking about this new designation. So I think from a land use map perspective, you know, we're doing exactly what the town would like us to do here. So anyway, I'll cut it there. I think Shelley, like I said, did a great job of touching on all my other points. So other than that, I will note, she mentioned the 2 neighborhood meetings. The only attendees at the neighborhood meetings were the property owners right here and the gentleman that lives up to the north. They were present at both meetings, and the first meeting they requested a couple conditions be added. At the second meeting, they asked me to confirm that they've been added. I was able to confirm that, and those conditions are, like Shelley said, the existing access drive that will be provided and maintained throughout all construction, so that at no point in time are they ever cut off from access. And then the other was restricting construction to not be on Sundays, and I didn't hear you say it, but they also asked for nothing after 7 p.m. Construction-wise. So those are conditions that we, you know, were able to add for them just to minimize the impact. You know, obviously, as I told them, a brand new street's going to be built in their front yard, so it's not going to be zero impact. But those landowners have been a part of the land swap discussion with Transit Trail. They've been part of the discussion throughout basically the entirety of the process. So you know, I believe we have their support, you know, in this rezoning. You know, Shelley talked about the buffer to the north. They at one point said, well, you know, we'd be fine if you took more land to the north as part of the land swap, because this stretch up here just was not that critical to them. So when we talked about a 10-foot buffer instead of a 20-foot buffer, they, you know, couldn't care less, essentially. So yeah, I think that's all the points I wanted to make. Answer any questions if you guys have them.
Any questions for the applicant?
I do have one question, Patrick.
Sure.
This is in the Upper Beaver Creek Basin, I believe. Is the proffer for stormwater above and beyond, or is that just what the UDO requires? Do you know?
My understanding, you know, it's a good question. All along I've been operating with the 10-year as the requirement for treating pre-verse post. It was one of the recommendations of the EAB to up that to the 25. So that's what we're doing. Whether or not you take away the EAB condition, would the 25-year be required anyway based on the basin? I'm not 100% sure. I can look into that. It's a good question, though.
It's irrelevant. I mean, I don't really care about detention because you're into the floodway of, you know, the lake. It doesn't make any sense to over detain right there. But the one thing I do, and again, I'm not going to bring you guys, like, because you're already in the process, but I do think as the town, we really need to start thinking about not the detention, but more of the water quality going into the Jordan Lake. And I know I brought it up on the Coke rebottling facility up there off Highway 751, and I don't think council like addressed it because I saw the layout just got submitted a few weeks ago, and they didn't really. They're just doing normal stormwater detention without really taking the Jordan Lake treatment into consideration. This is another example where you're right up against the waters, the nutrient sensitive waters, and we really need to be careful because Jordan Lake's in a bad way right now. And so again, you guys are low density, you have 1 acre per unit, it's irrelevant, but I think we have some big things coming up here that we need to be cognizant of.
The only thing I'll say is what you said at the end was going to be my, you know, response is, given 23 half-acre lots, I think from a development standpoint, it's fairly low impact. You know, we'll try to minimize tree clearing. You know, how the grading works out, I don't know exactly right now, but, you know, we'll do our best to match grade, you know, and keep tree clearing to a minimum and keep, you know. So I think from a impervious standpoint, it's going to be fairly low for especially the size development that we have. It's going to be a low percentage impervious.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Great.
I don't believe we have anybody here for public comment. All right, so I will pull it back to the board for discussion and a possible motion.
I don't see any serious issues with this one. I think I'd make a motion to approve as presented by Shelley in the staff report.
A motion by Ryan, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, Daniel, second. Motion and a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, 22 CZ12 passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excited for you, Joey.
Off the record, I'm not opposed to solar. If I can see a show of hands up here that has a solar system,
Almost there.
good job, I got two.
I will tell you right now, you caught me on a bad day. I just had to fork out $1,000 for an inverter that blew up. So I'm not a fan of them right now. Not a fan today.
Thank y'all.
Have a good night.
All right, item,
Electric car needs a new battery.
yeah.
My electric car. Also got a 220 volt.
All right, Shelley, one more time. Public
down,
hearing
one to
and
go.
possible motion regarding rezoning case 22 CZ17, the Townsend Station PUD.
3 down, 1 to go. So we are now on the southern side of town, down near Old US 1 between it and Hume Olive. You guys are probably a little familiar with this area. You've seen a lot of projects around here in a while, within the last little bit. This project is adjacent to Friendship Station PUD, both on the west and the north. This piece just hasn't developed yet. I think plans are either in review or about to be signed. This is Apex Friendship Elementary. This is one of the large lot subdivisions in Wake County. And then this parcel actually has most of the Little Beaver Creek Conservation easement on it. As you can tell, the site is mostly wooded, almost entirely wooded. There is some stream buffer through here, however, as well. The size of the project is about 16.39 acres. It's currently zoned Wake County R40W, as is pretty much everything to the south. To the east and, or I'm sorry, to the west and north, we have the Friendship Station PUD, and then to the east and north-ish, we have the Apex Friendship campus, school campus, and that's rural residential. The applicant is proposing to rezone to planned unit development conditional zoning, so it will also be pink soon. The 2045 land use map designates this as medium density residential and protected open space. This PUD is meeting the 2045 land use map. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on July 28th, 2022. That meeting report is in your staff report. The applicant is proposing to not exceed, actually there's been a change since this that I'll cover afterwards, but they're not exceeding the maximum permitted by medium density, and they're meeting all the requirements for it. As with the other projects, we received a letter of impact from Wake County Public Schools. The letter indicates that elementary, middle, and high schools within the assignment area are anticipated to have insufficient capacity for future students. School expansion in the next 5 years is likely to only address concerns at the high school level. To give you an idea, this is the existing condition sheet out of the planned unit development. Everything that I've highlighted in blue is stream buffer. Everything in green is the Little Beaver Creek Conservation easement. The purple is existing sewer easement, and the taupe-ish color is approved residential development in the area. And then the white is just the project for this, and then I didn't have another color for that. The applicant is proposing the following uses. So that accessory apartment, townhouse, greenway, recreation facility private, park active, park passive, and utility minor. The architectural conditions for this one are standard and consistent with the architectural conditions for almost all of our townhome units. in addition, the applicant is proposing the following. They will also be providing signage near SCMs regarding the need to eliminate and reduce fertilizer and pet waste. They'll be providing pollinator-friendly and native flora within the SCM plantings. 75% of the species selected, at least, will be native to the eastern U.S. At least 75% of the plant species used in the rest of the landscape design will also be native to the U.S. Perimeter buffers, SCMs, and other HOA areas may be planted with clover or warm season grasses for drought tolerance. HOA covenants shall not prohibit clover lawns throughout the neighborhood. At least 3 pet waste stations will be installed in the HOA common areas. All of the townhomes shall include solar conduit in the building design to facilitate future installment of roof-mounted solar panels. All of the garages will also be wired with a 220-volt outlet inside the garage for charging electric vehicles. Any outdoor lighting within the HOA will have full cutoff fixtures and that maximum color temperature of 3,000 Kelvin. Any sod used within the perimeter buffer, SCMs, and along streets, except on a residential lot, will not be fescue, and HOAs shall not restrict the construction of accessory dwelling units. On page 3 of your staff report, at the bottom are our proposed design controls. The ones that are generally of most interest are the maximum building height will be 45 feet and 3 stories. The maximum residential units have actually been changed since this. The developer's proposing 75 with a maximum density of 4.6. Your staff report says 5.5 and 90. And the building setbacks are listed as well. The development is proposing to exceed the UDO requirement for RCA. The applicant is proposing to provide 35% of the total project area for RCA and buffers. The current standard in this area is 30% for townhome developments. In addition, the applicant's proposing to donate $3,000 to a local nonprofit organization with a mission towards tree preservation and replacement. And then the buffers are largely consistent with the UDO requirements. There are two situations where they're slightly different. That's adjacent to Apex Friendship Elementary. The UDO requires a 15-foot type A buffer, and the applicant is providing a 10-foot type A buffer. The sections, however, where it's adjacent to the elementary school, there's a stream buffer on the school side of things, so the school itself doesn't actually get particularly close to the edge of the property. So staff has considered that reasonable. And that's just on both sides, both on the north and the south. It's the only difference. The towns at the station will be served by Apex water, sewer, and electric systems, and those will meet the town master plans and will be finalized at master subdivision plan review. In addition, the town will also meet all stormwater requirements in the UDO, including the 25-year storm in this area. And stormwater control devices will be landscaped and constructed to be an amenity to the development and blend into the surroundings whenever permitted. In addition, this is providing some additional pedestrian connectivity. All public streets will provide 5-foot sidewalks on both sides of the road. That's a requirement for all planned unit developments. Richardson Road extension will also provide a 10-foot side path along the eastern side of the road. So I know that this map is sideways, so east is down. It's the only way it would fit. So there'll be a 10-foot side path on this side. And the east-west, so up and down, residential street will also provide a 10-foot side path along the northern side of the property. This complies with a recent update to the town's bike ped system plan map. In addition, a 10-foot public greenway will connect to this side path right around where the stream crossing is, and will connect to the existing greenway stub within Friendship Station, so this one, which will then eventually connect to the school site over here. So there will be a walkable greenway connection to the elementary school, which then leads into the high school and middle school as well. Per the thoroughfare and collector street plan map, Richardson Road is designated as a future 4-lane median divided thoroughfare. The developer will dedicate the right-of-way along within their property frontage to meet the requirements shown in the plan. The proposed road section, however, will match the interim road section that's already out there. This basically just means that only the 2 easternmost lanes of the future 4-lane road will be constructed with this project. So as of right now, if you can see the dotted lines here, I know it's difficult. It just shows where there's already asphalt in this area. And that's just because it's easier for the town in the future to go in and pave 2 new lanes next to each other than widen, put 2 new lanes on the outside edge. We've learned things since the Peakway was done. This project will include the extension of about 500 feet of Richardson Road, and as well as providing an internal road network that provides interconnectivity to Richardson Road and the adjacent Friendship Station development. The residential street that connects to Richardson Road will be a right-in, right-out in the future when the 4-lane median divided section is completed. In the meantime, it's allowed to be full movement intersection. There's also a stub street extended to the Pridgeon property to the east, so this one here. And interconnectivity with the adjacent parcels here. Roadway improvements, of course, are subject to modification and final approval by the town and DOT. And then staff did ask that the developer attempt to purchase this additional piece of land as well, so that they could make the connection from Richardson Road to Horton Ridge Boulevard. Unfortunately, the owner of that land was not interested in selling. They were selling the developer a small piece, kind of cut out around through here, but they actually own all, almost all of their property is encumbered by the Little Beaver Creek conservation easement, which means that when they sell this piece, this is the only piece of land that they can viably sell and get anything for. So they decided to wait a little bit longer, probably in the hopes that the town will pay them more eventually. This is pure speculation, though. I don't have confirmation. Housing staff worked very closely with the applicant when they submitted their project. After they met with the applicant, they agreed to the following condition. Prior to recording the final subdivision plat for the project, the developer will record an option in favor of Habitat of Humanity for Wake County or another nonprofit affordable housing provider, with the option to purchase at least 4 townhome lots within the community, with the cost of such lots being the cost that the developer pays for the lots. As I stated earlier, there were a couple of changes to the conditions that are in your staff report. I got these today. So in this situation, the applicant has agreed to put a 4-kilowatt solar system on at least 4 townhome units within the development. Previously, they were not proposing any. They were giving us solar conduit and a 220-volt charger. That all still goes along with it, and then this is also added as well. And then in your staff report, as I alluded to a moment ago, the density is proposed at 5.5 units an acre and a maximum of 90 townhomes. The developer is actually not able to get quite that many, and so wanted to propose what's actually closer to what their final lot yield is, which is 4.6 and 75 townhomes. The applicant met with the EAB on July 21st, 2022. The EAB provided a list of recommendations, which are at the top of page 6 of your staff report. The applicant has included, with some adjustment, all of them at this point. The only 2 that were adjusted is they originally requested 4 pet waste stations. The applicant's providing 3, and with this new condition, the builder was originally requested to provide 29 solar systems, and is now providing 4 out of the total 75-ish instead of 29. Parks and Rec reviewed this at their September 28th meeting and unanimously approved a fee in lieu of dedication with credit for construction of the greenway if an opportunity is identified at master subdivision review and approval. Planning staff recommends the rezoning as proposed. We believe that this meets the town's unified development ordinance and will permit housing that's consistent with the surrounding development, provides affordable housing, extends the thoroughfare, and provides existing or environmental conditions that exceed the UDO's requirements at this point. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, the applicant's here as well.
Go back over the affordability for a moment, because it almost sounds like we traded off affordability for solar panels. Did I misunderstand?
I'm going back. Okay, we did not trade affordability for solar panels.
Okay.
The affordable condition that they provided us is that basically the developer will sell 4 lots, at least 4 lots, townhome lots, to an affordable housing provider at cost. So he's not committing to a certain percentage of affordability, but rather to selling them at cost and leaving that affordability standard up to the affordable housing developer. So we're getting that plus 4 units with solar panels. They're unlikely to be the same 4 units.
Because it's townhomes, presumably the 4 would be consistent or next to one another?
That would be that's typical, yes.
Different quality of build between the 4?
Probably different size, possibly different, I don't want to say architectural standards because they have to meet the same criteria, but possibly a different look to them. So maybe fewer complicated roof lines as opposed to something that's a simpler roof line, which is typically easier to build. If it's habitat, then the quality of the materials is typically the same. Even the white oak foundation typically uses the same type of building materials. It just may be a slightly simpler design because that's typically easier and less expensive to construct. I don't have conditions or elevations for those right now. I can show you what is proposed by the builder, but I don't have anything for the affordable units at the moment. But I know that the ones that we've looked at in the past have all looked good. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Shelley? Did the applicant care to speak?
Hello again.
Hello, Patrick.
Patrick Kiernan, Jones and Knosson Engineering. This time I'm here representing Charm City Developers for the Towns at the Station PUD. Thank you again to Shelley. Shelley got thrown into this one recently, taking it over from another planner, so she had to get caught up to speed pretty quick, and she's done a great job. She was correct in the density change. We, just from market research, I think we've realized that we originally did a layout with 18-foot wide townhome units, and then we increased the size to 22-foot wide units to better match the surrounding PUD, and also kind of keep up with what we're seeing from the market right now. So larger townhomes equals fewer. So that max went from 90 down to 75 to be a little more, like she said, realistic with the current yield. I'm gonna go back. So we're looking at this project like an infill project. To the north, Friendship Station sections 1 and 2 is 232 townhomes. So it's actually the same developer that developed Friendship Station ultimately and then sold to MI Homes as the builder. MI Homes is currently under construction with Friendship Station sections 4 through 6. and we'll be breaking ground hopefully very soon on sections 1 and 2. So I kind of set up the layout to help guide you into what a layout may look like with this rezoning. It's going to feel basically like an extension of Friendship Station. We're cut off from the west to development, to the north from development, or to development. We're cut off from the south from the North Carolina Conservation Easement, and the east from the Wake County School, Apex Friendship School site. The only little piece that opens up is the Pridgeon property, which we've got a street stub connected to. That ties to the large lot Fairfield subdivision. So there's a dozen or 2 dozen or so large estate lots down there, which I would assume would probably all come in as an assemblage, and one day maybe those neighborhoods connect. But for now, all we can do is provide that street stub. Let's see. To speak on affordability for a moment, this was interesting. So when we first met with CJ, when he was still with the town, he was guiding us in the direction of 3% affordability, which was in line with, I think, what a lot of the rezonings were asking for prior to the affordability policy being enacted, which I don't think has quite yet been enacted, but will be soon. So we were going 3% of 90, which at the time was 3 affordable units. We then dropped when we talked about max density dropping, we were looking at that 3% number, and we came to them and thought, would it be more appropriate to propose 2, for a 75 unit max? And at that point, CJ had left and Michael had come in, and he actually recommended that now they're kind of pointing us in the direction of what the policy upholds, which is 5%. So we went to him, and he said, well, actually, I was going to ask if you would increase it from 3 to 4. So that was something that, we discussed, and we thought, it's the right thing to do down here. It's townhomes. It's probably the right project to provide a little bit more. So, we agreed to that for 4 units. You asked about, does the solar replace that? It does not. For solar, in addition, the request of 29, we felt was not proportionate to some of the other rezonings that we've seen in recent times. But the bigger thing with that is really, we've got almost 16.5 acres, but you can see from the white, area down in here, there's not a ton of developable land. A lot of it is carved up by environmental features, conservation easement, Richardson Road, which is 110-foot wide right-of-way, leaving, all that portion to the north, to the west as unusable. It's not deep enough to put any, other residential streets or lots or anything. So what we're looking at is essentially this kind of chunk right here, and then a small area down on the other side of the stream buffer. So it's a relatively low density for townhomes. With the cost of Richardson Road being a made thoroughfare, albeit only constructing two lanes right now, it's still a much heavier pavement structure, so it's still an expensive road to build with just not a ton of yield. So we went back and forth about the solar many times, and we really felt it was the right thing to do to provide, and like you said, Mr. Akers, the 4 would presumably be together, it'd be one roof line. So maybe it's 1 4-unit building that has solar across the top. We wanted to at least make that offering rather than none. But we still think that asking for 29 was just, it never would have been able to work with the project that we're proposing, especially when not specifically affordability, but just home prices in general. That 29 affordable or solar units going on these homes is ultimately just going to increase the price of the rest of the townhomes. So maybe some of these don't qualify technically as affordable and aren't being given or sold to Habitat, but maybe somebody that otherwise can't afford a new single family home might be able to afford it, as is. So it's still, we feel like the right product for this area. The land swap that Shelley talked about, it shows on the existing conditions, so you can see it here. So really the reason for this swap was we're extending Richardson Road and this is just kind of nuancy with the layout at hand, but you know, we've got this Little Beaver Creek sewer outfall that exists. So, you know, the natural layout is a row of townhomes essentially backing up to the sewer outfall, and then the road on, you know, fronting on that. So and then beyond that, really, you know, a bigger piece of it is we've got a full access intersection with Horton Ridge Boulevard in the future, and then another intersection with Kettle Falls right here that has recently been built. So we're trying to get, you know, centered with our entrance as best we can between those two. So there was sort of a natural place where that road would want to tie into Richardson Road, and as the properties currently lie, there was not enough land, real estate to make that happen. So this adjacent property owner actually ended up in the green, you know, as far as the land swap goes. I think he ultimately gained more than 3 acres of net acreage in order for us to be able to get this project to work. So way later on down the road, you know, we approached trying to acquire more right of way to provide that that connection, and he was not interested in the slightest. He wrote a letter to the town, or wrote a letter to my client basically saying, I'm not willing to sell. I think, you know, maybe fatigued a little bit from asking over and over. But at the end of the day, you know, the attempt was made. This PUD proposes what we are able to propose on the site that we have control over. And like Shelley said, it's 500 feet of a thoroughfare road, which right now does not connect, you know, anywhere to the south. It's got a massive North Carolina conservation easement to get across, which will ultimately be a bridge section. And then to the south of that is about, I've got it written down, what was it? 15 parcels or so that would have to come in as an assemblage before Richardson Road ever comes from Old US 1 to the north. Presumably that will need to happen before the town, or, you know, because like Shelley said, when that property owner sells, he can't develop. It's entirely conservation easement, other than the corridor that's been released from the conservation easement for Richardson Road. So I think that really the only rational way that this moves forward is, you know, if these properties to the south of Little Beaver Creek develop, and there's then a gap that would otherwise connect from Old US 1 all the way out to 64. I think at that point in time, and again, speculation, that the town would probably entertain the budgeting of said connection. So, you know, we're providing 500 feet of that as part of this rezoning. It's, I think, I don't know, it's the best that we can do with what we've got right now. And again, it gets us to our subdivision entrance, which is what we need. So, I don't think there's anything else specific to touch on. Shelley mentioned greenway connections to the school ultimately that will be made. That'll also, so I think you mentioned it, but it's going to be for the east-west connection. It's going to be tied into the subdivision street that will run. Keep hitting that. So that'll be upgraded to a 10-foot side path instead of a 5-foot sidewalk. One way or another, that will ultimately connect to the Little Beaver Creek Greenway, Little Beaver Creek Greenway, I guess, which runs to the south of the Apex Friendship School. So it'll connect, you know, coming up this way from the south of the school, and then also kind of internal through Friendship Station. So a couple different connections to the school. Meeting the land use map, we're under the density thresholds. I think that's really all I wanted to speak on, other than what Shelley already gave you. So other than that, here for questions again.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you. Guessing there's no public comment section. All right, we'll pull it back to the board for discussion and possible motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the rezoning of 22 CZ 17.
I have a motion from Sarah. Do I have a second? Second. All right, Keith, a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposing? All right. 22 CZ 17 passes unanimously.
I'd like to propose minutes?
I have a motion to pose for 5 minutes. Do I have a second? All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Take Friday
5
afternoon
minutes,
off.
please.
So you get paid extra, you get to take Friday afternoon.
It is 7:53. We're going to go ahead and resume our planning board meeting. I believe we have some new business. We have some UDO amendments.
All right. Sorry, it's not here. There we go. All right, so we do have some UDO amendments that are requested by planning staff. The first set are in regard to definitions for warehousing fulfillment center, truck terminal, warehousing general, and wholesaling. General is being changed to wholesaling distribution center. Essentially, well, I wanted to point out, we did have one change based on some information we received kind of late in the game. So instead of talking about 4 axles, we're just gonna talk about large vehicles such as but not limited to tractor trailers and dump trucks for the truck terminal. In terms of the other 3, basically, we've had some issues with a variety of our industrial areas with zoning that allows wholesaling general but not warehousing. And so we wanted to clarify that warehousing general is pretty much dead storage. And the wholesaling distribution center is business-to-business products. So it could be things like beverage distribution centers or electronics distribution centers. The warehousing fulfillment center is a third-party logistics, which is customer orders, so e-commerce retailers, Amazon, that type of business. And so we wanted to have more distinct definitions so that folks knew what they're allowed to have in their industrial areas. I think you will see a few come back and add all of these to their permitted uses, because a lot of these businesses have pieces of a variety of different uses. Amendment 2 is to the Watershed Protection Overlay District in order to change all references to environmental engineering manager to stormwater engineering manager. The title for that position changed, so we need to make this change. Amendment 3 is to section 6111 riparian buffers and 6113 modifications by variance in order to modify the single-family residential riparian buffer requirements and riparian buffer variance standards. And the variance standards are to be consistent with state law, and then provide updated references to state law. And I want to recognize Robert, who from our water resources, he's been here all night waiting for this. He worked with our legal team to make these changes. There are a lot of changes. I'll basically just say most of these are things to do with state law. The one thing that's not is this section about residential properties. What we found was happening was that we were having a lot of variance requests going to our Board of Adjustment. We went from like 3 variance requests a year to kind of 2 to 3 a month. And some of them didn't make it all the way through the process, but we still have to talk to the property owners and explain what the process is, and it was very challenging for both water resources staff and planning staff. And so what this section does is it allows for residential redevelopment in an area of Zone 3, which is the outside buffer. It's not the state required buffer, it's the town buffer. What happened in these areas is that these neighborhoods were all built prior to the riparian buffer standards in the ordinance. They were applied to existing neighborhoods. So some folks, their houses, definitely their porches, are in riparian buffers. And so it's really not fair, and because we've had so many variance requests, folks, and what's going on is that these neighborhoods are at the point where the decks are falling into disrepair, need to be replaced. They don't want to replace it with the 10 by 12 deck that the builder built. They want to replace it with a screen-in porch or all-season room or a bigger deck, and it makes sense. And the Board of Adjustment has been issuing the variances, but in order to cut down on their workload and staff's workload and to make it easier for the citizens, less costly, we're setting this up so that they can just go straight to water resources staff to get I forget what it's called, a buffer authorization. And some things would require mitigation. So if it's a covered porch and a pool, it's not necessary infrastructure, but they can still get a buffer authorization if they do some mitigation. But if the actual residence itself or infrastructure for the home is in that Zone 3, it's allowed to be an encroachment. Most of this is, okay, so this section is the one, the standards. This is consistent with current state law, and so we wanted to make sure that we had the standards to be consistent. So that's what these sections are here. So we are here to answer any questions you may have about that.
Any questions?
Excited about making it easier for residents, definitely, easier on staff.
Yeah, I have 3 cases sitting on my desk that are waiting for this amendment to be approved by council in January so that they can not have to continue to go through the variance procedure.
Can I make a motion?
Tina has a motion.
Move to approve the various amendments as proposed.
Do I have a second?
Keith will second.
Keith will second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposing? Passes unanimously.
All right, and you may have noticed we added 2 new business items at the end. I'll just preface both of them and you guys can take 2 separate votes. The town clerk came to us and said that the elected officials would like to have all of the boards make recommendations each year for their chair and vice chair positions. So this is a new procedure that we'll be doing going forward. So basically, y'all can talk about it if you like, or we can just take a motion in a second and you can vote on that. The first one would be for the chair position for planning board as a recommendation to the mayor and council. They still have the final say, but they want to hear the recommendation from each board. And so all of our boards will be taking a vote on recommendations for their own boards.
We'd like to hear a speech, Mr. Reggie, as to why you should.
Well, let's see. Back in 2000.
I kid, of course.
No speech.
I'd make a motion that we keep the chair we have.
Thank you, Ryan.
I'll second that, yeah.
Tina and Keith, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposing? All right.
All right, so then new business 3 will be for the vice chair for 2023. I failed to mention, each of the appointments for chair and vice chair are only good for 1 year. They go from January 1st through December 31st. And the chair and vice chair can be appointed up to 4 times.
I'd like to make a motion that we keep Miss Tina Sherman as vice chair.
I second.
Ryan motion, Sarah second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. All right. I need one more motion.
To make a motion to adjourn this meeting today?
Sarah motion and Keith second. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.